That night in Thousand Oaks began like any other. Quiet, without a hint of anything unusual. But just hours later, a young man would die in his own apartment, stabbed 108 times by the woman he trusted completely. This isn't just a story about a seemingly harmless date or a simple marijuana try. It's a series of small, unconscious choices leading to an irreversible tragedy, where the line between victim and perpetrator blurs hauntingly. So what exactly happened behind those apartment doors? Was it a marijuana-induced psychosis? A silent, coerced act? Or a tragedy the legal system was never prepared to confront? The answer will force us to reconsider the hardest questions about justice, about accountability, and about the true cost of a seemingly harmless decision. Chad O'Melia was born on September 27, 1991, in Santa Clarita, a city north of Los Angeles, California. His father, Sean O'Melia, was an Irish construction supervisor. His mother, Michelle, separated from his father when he was 5 years old. Despite the separation, his parents showed him great love and tried to provide him with a stable family. Chad is known for being intelligent, responsible, and loyal. To his friends, he was the dependable big brother, always ready to help or offer advice without expecting anything in return. From a young age, Chad developed a love for American football, a passion he kept throughout his teenage years. While attending Chico State University, Chad continued playing American football while studying accounting, and later graduated. After graduating, he moved to Thousand Oaks, Los Angeles, with his dog, Athena. He shared the apartment with a roommate, Vinny Oliveira, while working at an accounting firm. He was working toward becoming a certified public accountant (CPA), which left him with little time for rest. To cope with his sleepless nights, he began using cannabis to help him relax and fall asleep. According to Vinny, Chad often showed signs of being high when he was at home. His cannabis use wasn't a secret. His friends and parents both knew. Although his parents didn't approve, they considered it a relatively harmless habit compared to other risks young adults faced. Sean, Chad's father, shared that his son always respected him and never used marijuana in front of him because he knew he hated it. Sean viewed marijuana as a bad habit that negatively impacted his son's mind and will. However, he never imagined that this would be the beginning of tragedies that would change everything. It was this habit that would eventually bring Chad into contact with a woman who would lead him into a devastating nightmare. Bryn was born on January 25, 1991, in Chicago, Illinois. Her early life was filled with challenges. She experienced serious health issues that required multiple surgeries and heavy medications, which affected both her body and her mind from a young age. These medical treatments took a severe toll on her hearing. By age 4, she needed cochlear implants to improve her hearing and help her learn to read lips. Growing up, Bryn often felt isolated and different. In school, she was usually the only student with hearing loss and sometimes hid her hearing aids to avoid teasing. As she grew older, Bryn turned what once made her feel ashamed into a source of strength. She went on to pursue a doctorate in biology at the University of Washington School of Medicine and graduated in the 2010 seconds with distinction. One of her professors later described her as one of the most exceptional students he had ever taught. In August 2017, at age 26, Bryn moved to Thousand Oaks to work as a biologist for UCLA Health, which is connected to the David Geffen School of Medicine. At first, she rented an apartment that didn't allow pets, so she had to leave her beloved Siberian Husky, Aria, with her family in Illinois. In April 2018, Bryn found a new pet-friendly apartment and was joyfully reunited with Aria. 2 years earlier, she had trained Aria to be a service animal, and having her dog back gave her renewed happiness and balance. The pair were often seen walking through Conejo Creek Park in Thousand Oaks, one of Bryn's favorite places to unwind. It was at that same park where Bryn first met Chad in late April 2018. According to her, Chad was the one who approached her several times when their paths crossed. Finally, he asked for her phone number, but she refused. Still, Chad gave her his business card and told her to reach out if she ever wanted to hang out. Not long after, Bryn initiated contact with Chad, and their chance encounters quickly developed into a romantic relationship. They shared meals, spent time with friends, and once enjoyed a bottle of Irish whiskey together while watching their dogs play at the park. Bryn was drawn to Chad's humor, yet warmth and thoughtfulness. Although she initially doubted their compatibility, she soon realized they complemented each other perfectly, like two pieces of a puzzle. On Sunday, May 27, 2018, the day before Memorial Day, Bryn spent the evening drinking with friends. Later that night, Chad contacted her and invited her over. Around 10:30 p.m., 27-year-old Bryn arrived at Chad's apartment with her dog, Aria. The two relaxed, had a few drinks, and chatted with Chad's roommate, Vinny. Shortly after midnight, Chad took out his water pipe, packed it with cannabis, and stepped onto the balcony to smoke. Bryn soon joined him and asked to try it. As soon as she inhaled, her throat burned, and she began coughing. She mentioned that she had never enjoyed cannabis and never felt its effects like others did. Curious, Chad packed the pipe again with even more cannabis and encouraged her to try once more so she could finally experience a high. Bryn agreed and took another hit. What happened next was terrifying and surreal. In the early hours of May 28, Thousand Oaks police received a frantic 911 call from Vinny, reporting that something terrible was happening in the apartment. When officers arrived, their body cameras captured a horrific scene. Bryn violently attacked Chad, stabbing him multiple times with kitchen utensils before self-harming. Police attempted to subdue her using a taser 4 times, but she did not react. Officers then used their batons, striking her 9 times until she finally released the weapon. Bryn suffered 5 fractures in one arm and deep cuts to her neck, base, and right hand. She had also attacked her dog, Aria, but the animal miraculously survived. Chad, however, did not. When police reached him, he was already dead, having been stabbed 108 times. Bryn was rushed to the emergency room and underwent emergency surgery, which saved her life. She was later admitted for further recovery. Once she regained consciousness, investigators began questioning her. Still intubated and unable to speak, she wrote her responses, claiming she had told Chad she didn't want to smoke anymore, but that he had forced her to. Investigators suspected she had no memory of what had happened, a fact they confirmed with her a few days later. When Bryn's health stabilized, she was arrested and charged with murder. The tragedy devastated both families. Chad's father, Sean, had the heartbreaking duty of telling his ex-wife, Michelle, about their son's death. He explained that he wanted to tell Michelle himself to be there for her in that shattering moment. Sean remembered seeing the light fade from her eyes as she realized their son was gone. From then on, Michelle fell into a deep depression. Sean later reflected that losing a child leaves a crushing guilt, a sense that happiness may never return. Michelle experienced exactly that, her grief compounded by her struggle with type 2 diabetes. After the funeral, Michelle felt undeserving of happiness. She refused to smile for photos or let anyone capture her appearing calm or content, believing that showing joy would disrespect her son's memory. Over time, this guilt consumed her, and she began to neglect her health. 18 months after Chad's death, she passed away from severe cardiac failure, having stopped her medical treatments. Sadly, Michelle didn't live to see the conclusion of Bryn's trial. Although no one can be certain, the repeated delays and eventual sentencing of her son's killer likely would have intensified her pain. Therefore, the first formal hearing was not held until November 9, 2023. In that long-awaited trial, Bryn Spacher, now 32 years old and fully recovered, finally testified before the jury. To aid Bryn's hearing impairment, real-time transcription monitoring devices were placed at both the witness stand and her table. Bryn began her testimony by describing her background and then recounted the night of May 27, 2018. She said that after smoking once, Chad encouraged her to try again. When she hesitated, he refilled the water pipe and urged her to inhale immediately to feel the effects. Bryn admitted that although he hadn't physically forced her, his insistence made her feel intimidated and unable to refuse. She testified that Chad wasn't always the gentle person others believed him to be. According to Bryn, she had seen flashes of his temper in the past, and those memories made her feel pressured to comply with his requests. Minutes after smoking a second time, she said she began to feel intensely disoriented. Time seemed to loop. Their conversation repeated, and every moment blurred into the next, creating a powerful sense of déjà vu. Bryn testified that she quickly lost the ability to speak coherently, her words dissolving into confusion. Panicked, she went inside, lay down on the couch, and closed her eyes to try to calm down. Instead of finding relief, she began hearing voices and seeing vivid, hallucinatory images behind her closed eyelids. She described the experience as being trapped in an endless cycle of fear, at one point believing she had died and was now imprisoned inside her own body. She said she heard her loved ones crying over her lifeless body and even felt their touch. But what she described next was even more surreal. Bryn claimed she had an out-of-body experience, observing from above as her body lay still on the couch. From that perspective, she said she saw Chad crying beside her while paramedics tried to revive her. Before continuing, she emphasized that everything after that point felt like watching a movie rather than living through it. In her account, she saw herself walking through the apartment, pushing chairs aside before entering the kitchen, where she grabbed 2 knives and threw them at Chad. Then, detached from any sense of control, she took 2 more knives and attacked one of the dogs. Bryn recalled hearing Chad's voice asking why she had hurt Athena, though she later learned it had actually been Arya. Moments later, she approached Chad, raised a knife, and then everything went black. Even while unconscious, she said she could still hear voices in her head, urging her to keep going. Among those voices were Vinny's panicked shouts as he ran from the apartment to get help. Bryn's hallucinations seemed endless, distorting her sense of time so much that she could no longer tell minutes from hours. Overwhelmed by the voices, she heard herself before everything faded away. When she regained consciousness briefly and incompletely, she was met not by clarity, but by chaos. She felt jolts of electricity rippling through her body as officers fired their tasers. Though in her disoriented state, she believed they were using a defibrillator to bring her back to life. She remembered waking up in the hospital as investigators began questioning her about the night's events. Her recollection, however, was fragmented, blurred between what had actually happened and what she might have imagined during her hallucinations. It wasn't until 2 days later that police informed her she had killed Chad. During the trial, the defense referred to forensic tests conducted on a water pipe found at the scene and brought in an expert to explain the results. Experts say that tests for detecting banned substances are not always completely accurate, as some compounds may go undetected. While the report confirmed the presence of THC, the main psychoactive compound in cannabis, the specialist noted that the substance could have been mixed with other drugs. This possibility was especially plausible if Chad had purchased the marijuana from an unlicensed dealer, who might have added other substances to enhance its effects or reduce costs. Although recreational marijuana was already legal in California at the time, Bryn's defense team argued that an important detail had been overlooked. Chad's roommate, Vinny, had also smoked the same substance earlier that night and claimed to have experienced hallucinations. The defense used this to argue that Bryn, an inexperienced user, didn't know what she was consuming and had been pressured into trying it without understanding the potential risks. Their case was supported by testimony from people who knew Bryn personally. Several former classmates stated that Bryn had always avoided banned substances, even distancing herself from friends who used them. One of them, 33-year-old Amy Kerouac, met Bryn in 2007 and described how they became close in high school through shared interests. While Bryn played basketball and Amy played softball, both bonded over their love of outdoor activities like hiking and camping, which were uncommon among their peers. Bryn's first encounter with marijuana occurred in 2014 while she was dating Kevin, a former Marine and personal trainer. During a camping trip in the Washington mountains, they decided to try a joint but quickly found they didn't enjoy it. Kevin later said he believed Chad may have pressured Bryn into smoking on the night in question in 2018. Although Bryn and Kevin broke up in 2017 when she moved to California, he described her as easygoing, kind, and genuine. Given these circumstances, the defense built their argument around the idea that Bryn had been unknowingly intoxicated. According to the California Penal Code, a person may be exempt from criminal liability if they commit an offense under duress or as a result of consuming a controlled substance without their knowledge. Despite this reasoning, the jury rejected the defense's argument. The biggest obstacle for both sides was Bryn's written statement to police while she was hospitalized. In it, she admitted that she had voluntarily taken a second hit from Chad's pipe. Later, Bryn claimed the document had been withheld from the prosecution for some time. However, during one hearing, the prosecutor presented new evidence that significantly altered the case. She portrayed Bryn very differently, presenting text messages from 2018 between Bryn and her friends. In these messages, Bryn wrote about getting so high that she had to miss work the next day and mentioned eating cannabis-infused edibles. This evidence allowed the prosecution to question not only Bryn's earlier statements but also her overall credibility. The prosecutor also highlighted that in most of Bryn's interviews with investigators and doctors, she never mentioned being pressured or coerced. Bryn responded directly to these accusations, saying she sometimes exaggerated when talking with friends, but maintained she had never been so intoxicated that she blacked out or missed work because of marijuana. The only time she had been late, she said, was once after drinking alcohol. Regarding the interrogations, she explained that she didn't repeat every detail because she thought the detectives already knew the facts. After repeatedly restating her responses to challenge the prosecution's claims, the defense called mental health experts to testify. Their evaluations confirmed that Bryn had no history of mental illness or violent tendencies, supporting the argument that her actions were the result of a marijuana-induced psychotic episode. This evidence seriously weakened the prosecution's case and led the jury to reduce the charge. On December 1, 2023, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Bryn Spacher was guilty of involuntary manslaughter, not murder. The decision shocked Chad's family and friends, who had hoped for a harsher outcome. On the evening of January 22, 2024, the night before sentencing, Chad's loved ones gathered outside the county government building to demand justice and a punishment that reflected the brutality of his death. The following day, the courtroom was packed with people, including members of the public, journalists, and Chad's family. When Bryn took the stand one final time, she delivered an emotional apology to Chad's family, addressing her words especially to his father, who continued to mourn his son without Michelle by his side. After nearly 6 years of waiting and suffering, the judge handed down the sentence. Bryn received 2 years of probation, instead of the 5 years of imprisonment initially recommended. She also had to complete 100 hours of community service, focusing on education about marijuana-induced psychosis. The judge warned that any violation of probation would result in immediate imprisonment. In the aftermath, Sean O'Melia, still mourning his son, denounced the ruling as unfair and biased, suggesting that Bryn's gender and race may have influenced the court's leniency. He also expressed concern that the verdict sent a dangerous message, Implying that marijuana users could excuse reckless or criminal acts, Sean suggested that Bryn needed a psychiatric evaluation to better understand the biological causes, as he believed that marijuana alone could not explain the full severity of her psychosis. The prosecutor also shared this concern, arguing that the sentence was too lenient, setting a dangerous precedent and damaging the credibility of the justice system. She argued that classifying the case as involuntary manslaughter ignored the brutality of the act, describing it as one of the most disturbing cases in her 29-year career. The outcome of Bryn's trial and Chad's tragic death fueled a broader public debate about recreational marijuana use. A leading forensic psychiatrist noted that the growing acceptance of cannabis has led to widespread misinformation about its risks. He emphasized that while psychotic reactions are uncommon, they can be severe, and studies show a clear link between cannabis use and psychosis. As public criticism mounted, Bryn's trial became a focal point for larger discussions about marijuana's potential dangers. People began to question whether cannabis directly causes violent behavior or acts only as a trigger when combined with other psychological or environmental factors. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Esmeralda Riches. Esmeralda Riches was born on August 23, 2006. Little is known about her childhood, but it is understood that she grew up in a loving family with her older sister. The family ran a small supermarket, where Esmeralda spent most of her time before attending the Agricultural Polytechnic Institute. She aspired to pursue higher education and dreamed of a modeling career, which she often showcased on social media. Esmeralda has an attractive appearance, giving her a great chance of success in this field. Esmeralda regularly shares funny and dancing videos on her social media, clearly enjoying her online presence and being in front of the camera. Her friends describe her as cheerful and kind, always ready to help others, which makes her popular. Unlike most teenagers, Esmeralda preferred to stay at home and invite her friends over rather than go out to various places. However, in the weeks leading up to the tragic incident, she suddenly began spending more time with her friends outside the house. This change in behavior confused her mother and sister. Her sister even suggested to their mother that they set some boundaries for Esmeralda, but her mother thought this was typical teenage behavior and did not see it as a cause for concern. However, the real problem was not her friends but her teacher, 30-year-old John Kelly Martinez. John had begun his teaching career after passing his teacher exam and started his probationary period in June 2022 at the academy where Esmeralda was in her final year. He initially taught mathematics but later volunteered to teach physical education, working with all groups, including Esmeralda's class. At that time, John was married with 2 daughters. He was known to be responsible and considerate, getting along with most of the students, and he was especially close to Esmeralda. At first, John and Esmeralda's relationship was merely that of a teacher and student. However, over time, John developed a special interest in her and gained her trust. One day during recess, John sat down next to Esmeralda and her friends and began asking strange questions, such as who the girls lived with, whether they had boyfriends. Unfortunately, the students did not notice John's strange behavior. Soon, he began inviting Esmeralda to meet him outside of school, often bringing other students along to avoid attracting attention. On February 12, 2023, John planned to go for a walk along the beach that evening with his nephew and 3 of Esmeralda's friends. However, since Esmeralda's parents did not allow her to go out at night, she was worried that her mother would not permit her to join them. To resolve this issue, she asked John to pick her up and help convince her mother. John agreed and arrived at Esmeralda's house around 7:30 p.m. in his black Honda, accompanied by his nephew and 3 friends. They went inside to talk to Esmeralda's mother about allowing her to go for a walk to a nearby horse show. At first, her mother was hesitant. However, after considering that Esmeralda would be with her teacher and classmates, Esmeralda's mother finally agreed to let her go. She did not know that this decision would have serious consequences for her daughter. That evening, Esmeralda's father returned home from church and found that Esmeralda was missing. When he asked his wife where she was, Esmeralda's mother explained that she had allowed Esmeralda to go for a walk. Esmeralda's father became angry, but she assured him that Esmeralda was with her teacher and classmates. As the night wore on and it became 11 p.m., Esmeralda still had not returned. Esmeralda's father called her, and surprisingly, she answered immediately, saying that she was on her way back from the beach and would be home in 10 minutes. Her father went outside to wait for her because she did not have her keys. A few minutes later, Esmeralda arrived home, accompanied by a friend and John. After seeing the girls off, John left immediately. Esmeralda's parents found her looking worried and pale, almost too weak to walk. Her friend helped her into the room and laid her down. Worried about her condition, her mother asked if Esmeralda had been drinking. Esmeralda replied that she had only had a sip of wine, which upset her mother. Esmeralda's father began scolding her for coming home late. During the argument, Esmeralda got up to go to the bathroom. Her mother then noticed a red stain. When her mother asked about it, Esmeralda said that she had just started her period. Her mother found this strange because she believed her daughter had finished her period a few days earlier. Nevertheless, she chose not to question the matter further. On the morning of February 13th, Esmeralda sent a text message to her friend asking for help, saying that she was bleeding. Around 6 a.m., Esmeralda's mother noticed that her daughter had not yet woken up for school. She knocked on Esmeralda's bedroom door, expecting her to wake up, but there was no answer. Worried, her parents entered the room and were horrified to find it empty and the bed covered in blood. They rushed into the bathroom and discovered Esmeralda. When they ran closer to check, her parents found that Esmeralda was dead. Overwhelmed with grief, they called the police. The police arrived, and around 8 a.m., Esmeralda's body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medicine for an autopsy to determine the cause of death. Her family was shocked, not knowing the details, but they suspected that something terrible had happened the night she went out. They discovered several text messages on Esmeralda's phone to her friend, indicating that a hard object had been inserted into her genitals, along with a voice message asking for help. At the time, the family was unaware of Esmeralda's relationship with John, but they quickly identified him as the prime suspect, prompting an investigation into the events of that night. The parents of 3 teenage girls who were with Esmeralda that night turned over their cell phones to the police to assist in the investigation. The police found several text messages from Esmeralda's friend, who drove her home, indicating that Esmeralda had begun bleeding from the 5 pills John had provided to induce an abortion. Esmeralda's friends urged her to go to the hospital, but she refused. Text messages showed that she had passed out several times while in John's car on the way home. The girls' phones also displayed messages from John asking about Esmeralda's condition. On the morning of Tuesday, February 14th, John was arrested and taken to the police station as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. The Department of Education suspended him for 90 days without pay to allow the investigation to proceed. During the search of John's home, his nephew was also arrested for attempting to conceal clothing, specifically the shirt, pants, and shoes that John had been wearing that night. Meanwhile, the chief prosecutor interviewed the 3 girls who were with Esmeralda. Their testimony was crucial for the police in piecing together the events of that night. They reported that they initially drove around the area, but at some point, John stopped at a store where he bought some beer and pills. When he returned to the car, he told Esmeralda to move from the back seat to the front. They then drove over 60 kilometers to the beach. John poured beer into a thermos and added some unidentified pills before giving them to Esmeralda. She indicated that she did not know what was in the thermos besides the beer. When they reached the beach, everyone got out of the car except for John and Esmeralda. After about half an hour, John called the group to say it was time to head back. On the way, Esmeralda asked to stop at a gas station so she could use the restroom. When her friends joined her, they noticed that her clothes were covered in blood. Everyone rushed to help Esmeralda. The gas station manager saw the situation and informed John of what was happening, causing him to panic and say that they might be in trouble and needed to take Esmeralda home. Her friends decided to buy her a new outfit. As they drove to Esmeralda's house a few miles away, they needed to stop at a friend's house to change Esmeralda's clothes again. The prosecutor's office obtained surveillance camera footage from the gas station where the girls said they had stopped that night. The video confirmed that the car had indeed stopped there, and the manager corroborated the girls' claim. A few days later, forensic experts examined the area and found traces of human blood where the girls had indicated. Police also discovered another stop at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they obtained surveillance camera footage and John's purchase receipt. The receipts showed that he had purchased water, medicine, and disposable towels for the woman. While the investigation was still ongoing, Esmeralda's funeral was held. Friends and family said their final goodbyes, remembering her as a fun-loving and loving young woman. Her sister stood by the coffin, deeply saddened. Esmeralda was buried in the city cemetery according to Christian tradition. During the burial, her parents expressed deep sorrow at their loss. They lamented that their daughter had not confided in them about her troubles or sought help, believing that if she had, she might still be alive. Esmeralda's sister mentioned that she had frequently asked Esmeralda about her relationship with the teacher, but Esmeralda always denied any relationship. Their father stated that he had never met John before that tragic night and insisted that if he had been home, he would have prevented this situation from occurring. There are many theories about Esmeralda's death. Some believe she died of a heart attack, while others think it was due to blood loss from the abortion pill that John gave her after their encounter. These speculations were put to rest when the autopsy results were released. The report revealed that Esmeralda died from a ruptured vagina, which resulted in severe bleeding and hemorrhagic shock due to the abuse. The hemorrhagic shock eventually damaged Esmeralda's heart, preventing it from pumping enough blood. The doctor who performed the autopsy insisted on conducting toxicology tests to rule out pregnancy. At the time of her death, her family was confident that the results would be negative, believing that Esmeralda and John's encounter that night was their first and last. The family's attorney stated that regardless of the test results, they would seek a more thorough investigation. Esmeralda's family conducted their own tests, which returned different results than those of the state medical examiner based on evidence collected by the police on February 20th. As a result, the prosecutor's office sought to charge John and also requested the arrest of his nephew, Robiel Murillo Martinez, as an accomplice. The prosecution's theory was that John drugged Esmeralda that night to assault her, causing injuries that eventually led to her death hours later. Rubiel allegedly knew about the incident. However, the attorneys for John and his nephew argued that the prosecutors did not have enough evidence to hold both men in custody and requested their release. The defense attempted to blame Esmeralda's parents for her death, claiming they were angry that Esmeralda had been with John and his nephew that night. After reviewing the evidence presented at trial, the judge ordered John to be held in a correctional rehabilitation center for 12 months before the trial. Rubiel was required to report regularly to the police station. Additionally, the girls who were with Esmeralda that night were summoned to assess their involvement and potential punishment. This court decision helped to defuse tensions, but the lawyer warned that Esmeralda's body might need to be exhumed for further forensic examination. A few days later, the case was again thrust into the spotlight when an audio recording, allegedly made by one of John's daughters, began circulating online. In this recording, the daughter defended her father, claiming that Esmeralda was not abused because she willingly got into John's car. Meanwhile, John's wife faced a separate scandal after she sold her husband's car for about $14,000 shortly after his arrest. On March 28, the prosecutor's office confirmed that John's wife had sold the car and expected to receive the remaining payment later. Police also seized a handgun that had been sold to John by a woman. John's wife was arrested on suspicion of involvement in the crime and concealing evidence, but was released hours later due to a lack of evidence against her. The investigation continues. In the following months, police worked to gather evidence to confirm John's involvement in Esmeralda's death. During a second search of John's home, they discovered a box of birth control pills containing levonorgestrel, the same active ingredient found in Esmeralda's body. Additionally, brown women's pants, a dark blue blouse, and a white napkin were collected from the house. Several pieces of blue plastic bags and other items were collected and sent for forensic examination. Subsequent analysis determined that the clothing belonged to Esmeralda. On November 24, 2023, judge ordered that John be tried as the sole defendant in the case concerning Esmeralda's death. The judge dismissed the charges of illegal possession of a weapon, leaving him to be tried only for the charges of deprivation of life and abuse related to Esmeralda. A judge from the Superior Court will decide John's sentence. In contrast, all charges against Rubio Murillo Martinez were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. The prosecution and Esmeralda's family lawyers have expressed their intention to appeal this decision. The trial was originally scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was postponed. The hearing finally began on January 15, with the press barred from attending. The hearing commenced with the reading of the indictment, followed by testimony from witnesses. Esmeralda's parents were the first to speak. They expressed their deep love for their daughter and their immense grief at losing her. Esmeralda's father directed his comments at John, emphasizing that John had relied on his role as an educator and child advocate. After the emotional testimony from Esmeralda's family, John spoke. He tries to play the victim, admitting to being intimate with Esmeralda but insisting it was consensual. He also claimed that he had brought her home alive and unharmed. The prosecution argued that Esmeralda died as a result of fatal injuries inflicted by John. To support their case, the prosecution presented 40 pieces of evidence, including witness statements, audio and video material collected during the investigation, and photos and videos of Esmeralda with John, as well as Esmeralda's autopsy report. After all the evidence was presented, the prosecution and Esmeralda's family attorney requested a prison sentence for John. They also attempted to add an additional charge, alleging that he had committed the crime of torturing a minor. However, this charge was dismissed by the judge. On March 14, 2024, the court found John Kelly Martinez guilty and sentenced him to 20 years in prison. He was ordered to pay Esmeralda's family $33,000 in restitution, along with a $3,400 fine. After the verdict, John apologized to Esmeralda's parents and the public for his actions. Although no sentence could bring Esmeralda back, the verdict brought relief to her family. They expressed their gratitude to everyone involved in the investigation and trial and stated that they were satisfied with the outcome. Esmeralda's mother described her daughter as a cheerful and happy girl. After her death, her mother tried to call her many times, struggling to accept the loss. Esmeralda's father used to wake her up every morning, but now he will never have that chance again. Both of Esmeralda's parents pray for the strength to overcome their grief, but they find it difficult to forgive John. Esmeralda's tragic story has deeply affected many people. Her life ended, highlighting the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries in the teacher-student relationship. In a mountain village built for winter escape, the last confirmed moments of Ryan Stuka's known life were painfully ordinary. He was 20 years old, from Beaumont, Alberta, and spending the season in Sun Peaks, British Columbia, where he had moved in December 2017 with a close friend to work through the winter. On Friday, February 16, 2018, he worked his shift, returned home, and later went out with friends to a silent disco at a local pub. Nothing in that sequence suggested a crisis. Nothing signaled that the night would harden into one of Canada's most haunting unsolved disappearances. The group left the pub and went to a house party on Burfield Drive, only a short distance from the place Ryan shared with roommates. According to the family's published timeline, that too was ordinary for him. He was social, comfortable with his friends, and not known for abruptly separating from them. Then, sometime around 2:10 a.m. on Saturday, February 17th, the night narrowed to a final sighting. One roommate had already left. A second decided to head home. Ryan was seen standing up, apparently putting on his coat and shoes. That roommate left believing Ryan was right behind him. But within moments, Ryan was gone. The distance home was short. The terrain was familiar. Yet by the next day, Ryan had not shown up for his regular shift at work. His roommates contacted the police and filed a missing person report. Family sources say missing work was out of character. More troubling still, Ryan's phone, social media, and normal lines of contact fell silent from that point forward. No message, no call. No digital trace that publicly changed the story. That is what makes the case so unsettling. Ryan did not vanish on a highway, in a wilderness expedition, or during a long solo trip. He disappeared in the space between a front door and a familiar walk home. Years later, renewed reporting has shown that investigators still have no public answer, and the RCMP has not ruled out foul play, even though no suspicious evidence has been publicly disclosed. The case remains suspended between simple possibilities and a far darker unknown. Before the disappearance became a headline, before search grids and unanswered questions, Ryan Stucca was simply a young man building a season of his life. He grew up in Beaumont, Alberta, a quiet community where routine and familiarity shaped the rhythm of daily life. Friends and family described him as easygoing, social, and grounded. He wasn't someone who drifted aimlessly. He made plans. He followed through. There was a steadiness to him that made what happened later so difficult to reconcile. According to those close to him, Ryan had no history of disappearing, no pattern of withdrawing without explanation. When he left home, he stayed in touch. That consistency would later become one of the first warning signs. In December 2017, just 2 months before he vanished, Ryan made a decision that many people his age make. He left Alberta and moved to Sun Peaks, British Columbia, with a close friend. The goal was simple: work the winter season, experience something new, and step briefly outside the structure of home. Sun Peaks offered exactly that: long days on the mountain, nights with friends, and a tight-knit community built around shared routines. He found work quickly and adapted without difficulty. Co-workers and roommates later described him as reliable. He showed up for his shifts. He kept a normal schedule. There were no known conflicts, no signs of distress that stood out in hindsight. If anything, his life in Sun Peaks followed a pattern that was predictable and stable. His friendships formed quickly, as they often do in seasonal towns. Shared housing, shared work, shared nights out. The environment was transient, but the connections felt immediate. Ryan fit into that world without friction. He attended social events, spent time with friends, and moved through the village with a familiarity that came from routine rather than time. There were no indications of risk. No evidence that he felt unsafe. No reports of arguments, threats, or unusual encounters in the days leading up to February 17, 2018. From every visible angle, Ryan's life was unfolding normally. That normality is what investigators would later return to again and again, because when someone disappears, the answer often hides in what changed. And in Ryan's case, nothing obvious had happened. A young man, far from home but not lost. Surrounded by people. Living a life that made sense. Which is why, when he stepped out into the cold that night and failed to return, the absence felt immediate and deeply wrong. Morning arrived quietly in Sun Peaks, the kind of still winter morning that reveals nothing at first glance. snow muted the village. The night before seemed to dissolve into routine. But inside one shared home, something was already out of place. Ryan Stuka had not come back. At first, it did not register as an emergency. In a resort town, late nights were common. People stayed at friends' places. Phones died. Plans shifted without notice. But as the hours passed, that assumption began to fracture. Ryan had work scheduled that day. He was known to show up. Reliable. Consistent. That was part of who he was. He didn't arrive. Roommates tried to reach him. Calls went unanswered. Messages received no reply. His phone, normally an active line of connection, had gone silent. According to information later shared by the family, there was no further activity on his device after the early morning hours. No indication of movement. No sign of communication. Just an abrupt stop. By midday, concern had hardened into something more serious. A missing person report was filed with the RCMP. The timeline they provided was tight, almost unnervingly so. Ryan had last been seen around 2:10 a.m., leaving a house on Burfield Drive. His home was only a short walk away. A matter of minutes. A route he knew. A route he had likely taken before. Somewhere within that small window, something had gone wrong. Investigators began with the immediate circle. Friends at the party were questioned. Roommates were asked to reconstruct the night. Who saw him last? What was his condition? Had he seemed upset, intoxicated, or distracted? The answers pointed in one direction: nothing unusual. No argument. No visible distress. No reason to believe he would not simply walk home and go to sleep. Police then turned to the geography of the disappearance. The distance between the party and Ryan's residence was minimal, but the area included open spaces, snowbanks, and partially developed lots. In winter conditions, even a short walk could become disorienting if something disrupted the path. But there was a deeper concern emerging beneath the surface of those early questions. There were no witnesses who saw Ryan after he stepped outside. No confirmed sighting on the road. No one could say they watched him reach the next point in his journey. The moment he left that house, the trail did not just weaken, it vanished. As daylight faded into another cold evening, the situation shifted from uncertainty to urgency. A young man had disappeared within a confined space, in a controlled environment, in a time frame that should have left answers behind. Instead, it left nothing. And as the first full day closed without contact, investigators were forced to confront a question that would define everything that followed. How does someone disappear so completely, so quickly, in a place that small? By the second day, the tone of the investigation had shifted. What began as a concern had become a coordinated search. The Sun Peaks area, usually known for its hustle and bustle, ski lifts, tourists, everything, became more tense and concentrated. RCMP officers began organizing ground efforts, working alongside Kamloops search and rescue. The assumption, at least in the early phase, followed a familiar and urgent line: Ryan may have become disoriented in the cold. Time mattered. Exposure in winter conditions could turn fatal within hours. Search teams moved quickly. They started with the most logical path, the short route between the party on Burfield Drive and Ryan's home. Every meter was examined. Snowbanks were checked. Pathways, roadside edges, and wooded areas just beyond the main trail. Volunteers joined in, forming lines, walking shoulder to shoulder across terrain that had already begun to erase footprints. But the snow was both a clue and an obstacle. Fresh snowfall in the hours after Ryan's disappearance had blanketed the ground, softening any impressions that might have been left behind. If he had stumbled, fallen, or veered off course, the evidence was already fading. The window for reading the landscape had nearly closed before the search even began. Still, they expanded outward. Canine units were deployed, trained to pick up scent and follow it across a distance. Drones equipped with infrared technology scanned from above, searching for heat signatures beneath snow or brush. Helicopters swept over the surrounding area, mapping terrain that could not be easily reached on foot. Snowmobiles carried teams deeper into less accessible sections of the mountain. Each method added coverage. Each pass added hope. But nothing held. No clothing. No footprints that led away from the expected path. No disturbance in the snow that suggested a fall or struggle. The dogs did not produce a definitive trail. The infrared scans revealed no body heat, no hidden form beneath the white surface. It was as if Ryan had stepped out of the house and dissolved into the landscape. Days turned into extended search efforts. The grid widened. Areas were revisited, cross-checked, and searched again under different conditions. Volunteers came in numbers, responding to the urgency of a young man missing in their community. His face began to circulate, on posters, in conversations, in quiet exchanges between people who had never met him but now felt connected to the outcome. And yet, despite the scale of the operation, the result remained unchanged. There was no trace. This absence began to challenge the initial assumption. In cases of exposure, something is usually found: a body, an item, a sign of movement that tells a story of final moments. Here, there was only silence. A search grid lay carefully across a landscape that refused to answer. As the organized efforts continued, investigators were forced to consider a more unsettling possibility. What if Ryan had not remained within the search area at all? As the search efforts expanded without result, the investigation entered a quieter, more complex phase. The urgency of rescue gave way to analysis. Without physical evidence, the case began to rely on possibility, carefully constructed, repeatedly tested, and often left unresolved. The first and most immediate theory was exposure. It was winter in Sun Peaks. Temperatures dropped well below freezing during the night. If Ryan had become disoriented, slipped into a snowbank, or wandered off the main path, hypothermia could have set in quickly. In similar cases, victims are often found within a relatively close radius of where they were last seen. That expectation shaped the early search grids. But the absence of evidence began to erode that theory. Despite extensive sweeps using trained personnel, canine units, and aerial support, no trace consistent with exposure was located. No clothing, no disturbance in the terrain, no remains. Investigators did not publicly confirm any findings that supported a fatal accident in the immediate area. The landscape had been searched too thoroughly to ignore that silence. A second possibility emerged. Perhaps Ryan had taken a different path. A shortcut. A detour. In unfamiliar or poorly lit terrain, even a small deviation could lead to larger consequences. There were construction zones, wooded areas, and undeveloped lots in the vicinity. It was possible, according to some interpretations of the investigation, that he entered an area that had not yet been fully mapped in the earliest hours. But again, the lack of trace complicated the theory. There was also the question of whether Ryan had encountered someone after leaving the party. Foul play has never been ruled out by investigators. However, there has been no publicly confirmed evidence of a struggle, no witness placing him in a confrontation, and no known suspect identified. Still, the complete disappearance, without physical evidence, left space for that possibility to exist. In cases where individuals vanish abruptly within a confined area, investigators often examine whether a vehicle was involved, or whether the person entered a structure willingly or under pressure. Another layer added to the uncertainty: Ryan's digital silence. There was no known activity on his phone after the time he left the house. No outgoing messages. No calls. No use of banking or social platforms. In modern investigations, digital footprints often extend the story beyond the last sighting. In this case, they stopped abruptly, reinforcing the idea that whatever happened occurred quickly. Each theory offered a path forward. None provided closure. The investigation remained suspended between explanations: accident, misadventure, or something more deliberate. Without evidence to anchor one direction, the case resisted resolution. It became defined not by what was known, but by what could not be proven. And as time moved forward, another challenge began to take shape. Because when a case produces no answers, the risk is not just that it remains unsolved, but that it begins to fade. Time moved forward, but the case did not. In many missing person investigations, momentum fades. Leads dry up. Resources shift. Files are archived. But Ryan Stucka's disappearance resisted that pattern. It remained active, not because of new evidence, but because of the absence of it. The unanswered questions were too stark, the timeline too narrow, the disappearance too complete to be set aside. The RCMP continued to treat the case as ongoing. Investigators revisited witness statements, re-examined the known timeline, and remained in contact with the family. Nothing publicly indicated a definitive shift in direction. No suspect was named. No confirmed evidence altered the original framework. But behind that stillness, the case remained open, quietly worked, carefully preserved. Search efforts did not end with the initial operation. In the months and years that followed, organized searches resumed at different intervals. Seasonal changes altered the landscape, offering new opportunities. Snow melted. Terrain became visible again. Areas previously buried under winter conditions could finally be examined in detail. Volunteers returned. Search teams retraced earlier grids, expanded into new zones, and rechecked locations that had once yielded nothing. Each time, the hope was the same, that something had been missed. But each time, the result remained unchanged. No trace of Ryan was found. Public awareness became a critical force in keeping the case alive. His image circulated far beyond Sun Peaks. Posters, media coverage, and online campaigns extended the search beyond physical terrain into the broader public. Tips came in, some vague, some specific, but none that led to a confirmed breakthrough. Investigators followed what they could. Each lead carried the possibility of movement, of direction. But none reshaped the core mystery. There was also the passage of time itself. As months turned into years, the nature of the investigation evolved. The focus shifted from immediate recovery to long-term resolution. The questions remained the same, but the context changed. What had happened in those final minutes? Who, if anyone, had seen something but not realized its importance? Was there a detail overlooked in the earliest hours that now held meaning? Cases like this do not close easily. They persist in a space between action and waiting, between evidence and absence. The file remains open, but the answers remain out of reach. And yet, in Ryan's case, something resisted the silence. The investigation did not disappear, even when progress stalled. Because outside of official efforts, another force had begun to take shape. A family that refused to let the story end. For the Stucka family, time did not soften the uncertainty. It sharpened it. From the moment Ryan was reported missing, his parents stepped into a reality few are prepared for, a life defined not by answers, but by waiting. And when the search efforts in Sun Peaks began to slow, they did not step back. They stepped forward. His mother, Heather Stucka, became the voice of the case. She spoke to the media, organized awareness campaigns, and worked closely with investigators, not as an observer, but as an active participant in the search for her son. Where official updates were measured and cautious, her presence carried urgency. She understood something instinctively. Cases like Ryan's could not rely on time alone. They required visibility, pressure, memory. The family returned to Sun Peaks again and again. They walked the same paths Ryan might have taken. They stood in the same areas that had already been searched, trying to see what others might have missed. Not because they believed the answer was obvious, but because doing nothing was not an option. Each visit was both an act of hope and an act of endurance. They built a network. Through social media, community outreach, and public appeals, Ryan's story spread beyond British Columbia. His face became recognizable. His name stayed present. The family worked to ensure that even years later, someone might remember something, a small detail, a passing moment, a piece of information that once seemed insignificant. A reward was offered. An amount that later reached $25,000, intended not as an incentive alone, but as a signal. This case was not closed. This family was still searching. Someone, somewhere, might know something that had not yet been shared. And there was another layer to their effort. They did not accuse. They did not speculate publicly without care. Their message remained focused. If anyone had information, no matter how small, come forward. That restraint carried weight. It preserved the integrity of the case while keeping the door open for truth. Years passed, but the family did not withdraw. They adapted. They persisted. They carried Ryan's story into spaces where official investigations could not always reach. And in doing so, they changed the nature of the case itself. It was no longer just a missing person file. It became a shared responsibility between investigators, the community, and those who refused to forget. Because in disappearances like this, silence can become permanent unless someone continues to break it. And still, despite everything, one question remained untouched. What really happened in those final minutes? There is no final scene in this case. No courtroom. No confession. No definitive moment where the truth is laid bare and understood. Instead, there is a space, unresolved, unanswered, that has stretched across years. And within that space, Ryan Stucker remains exactly where he was last seen, stepping out into the cold, into the dark, into a silence that has never been broken. For his family, the absence is not abstract. It is daily. There is no certainty to hold on to. No confirmation of life, but also no confirmation of death. This is the condition of ambiguous loss, a state where grief cannot fully settle because the story has no ending. They continue to live between two realities, one where Ryan is gone and one where he could still be found. That tension does not fade. It lingers. In Beaumont, in Sun Peaks, in every place where Ryan once existed as a presence rather than a question, the impact remains. Friends have grown older. Lives have moved forward. But his name still surfaces, often quietly, in conversations that begin the same way, "Do you remember?" The case has become part of the memory of those communities, not because it was solved, but because it wasn't. There are lessons in that silence, about how quickly ordinary moments can fracture. About how even the smallest gap in a timeline, a few minutes, a short walk, can hold an entire mystery. And about the limits of investigation, even with modern tools, when evidence leaves nothing behind. But there is also something else. Persistence. Ryan's case did not disappear because the people connected to him refused to let it. His family continues to ask questions. Investigators continue to keep the file open. The public, in small but meaningful ways, continues to remember. And that collective refusal to accept disappearance as an ending has kept the possibility of truth alive. Somewhere, there may still be an answer. A detail unnoticed. A memory unspoken. A piece of information that has not yet found its way into the light. Cases like this do not always resolve quickly. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they depend on a single moment, a decision to come forward that changes everything. Until that moment arrives, the story remains unfinished. And in that unfinished space, one question continues to echo. Not just for investigators, not just for a family, but for anyone who hears it. How does someone vanish without a trace and leave behind only silence? In the early hours of New Year's Day 2018, two young lovers stepped out of a nightclub in La Paz, Bolivia. But they never come home. 19 days later, on January 19, 2018, police and rescue teams stood on the banks of the Orcoja-Huira River. That morning, divers and forensic specialists began hauling strange, heavy bundles from the riverbed. When the sack was cut open, the scene was horrific. Inside were two bodies decomposed serious. Days spent trapped in water and darkness had ravaged them. Identification by sight alone was impossible. After initial examination, a chilling common detail emerged. Both victims had suffered severe traumatic brain injuries. The damage indicated they were struck with a blunt object wielded with tremendous force. This was not an accidental fall. The victims were murdered deliberately and brutally, then thrown into the river like construction debris to erase traces of the crime. The victims were later identified as Carla Bellot and Jesus Cañicer. Both were born in 1992. Their lives ran along similar lines from an early age. In 2003, both families suffered the same tragedy. Each lost their father. After the loss, Carla's mother moved her 5 younger children from Santa Cruz de la Sierra to La Paz, trying to rebuild. As the eldest, Carla took responsibility. She helped raise her siblings, monitored homework, curfews, behavior. She enrolled in accounting and completed her certification through accelerated classes so she could start working sooner, contribute to the household finances. The story in the Cañicer family is almost identical. Jesus grew up with 3 older sisters, but as the only son, he became the principal support for his mother, who was a seamstress. He didn't just keep order in the house, he helped with her tailoring work, taking sewing jobs when necessary. At family weddings, he escorted his sisters down the aisle, standing in the place where their father once would have been. At the time of his disappearance, Jesus was completing his economics degree and finishing the final work on his thesis. Carla and Jesus met at a college party in 2008. Their relationship developed gradually through long talks and walks home together. Eventually, their friendship turned into a romance. Carla kept their relationship a secret for a while, finally introducing Jesus as her boyfriend at her graduation party. They were what many would call a homely couple. They weren't drawn to loud parties or nightlife. They preferred family gatherings, small trips, quiet weekends. They had a clear plan. As soon as Jesus completed his thesis defense, they'd get married and start their life together in their own place. The timeline for January 1, 2018 has been reconstructed through digital breadcrumbs. Carla and Jesus had never planned on ringing in the new year with an all-night celebration. They only agreed to go to the Planta Baja Club after being persuaded by friends. Around 4 o'clock a.m., Carla posted a photo on Facebook. The two looked happy, smiling, relaxed, enjoying the concert, the festive atmosphere. About an hour later, their activity shifted from social media to private chats. They messaged family members, saying they would leave the club at 6 o'clock a.m. and should be home around 7 o'clock a.m. At the same time, Jesus sent a series of messages to his sisters and to Carla's brother-in-law. These were not typical New Year greetings. He wrote that he loved them and promised to take care of Carla. The wording was strange, almost like a farewell. It unsettled the recipients, but there was still no reason to panic. That day was Carla's nephew's birthday. Both she and Jesus were expected at a family lunch. After 7 o'clock a.m., their phones still rang, but no one answered. Anxiety rose as the hours passed. They were punctual, reliable, and deeply family-oriented. It is very unusual for them to miss an event without notice. In the early afternoon, Jesus's mother drove to Carla's house. When she arrived, the house was empty and quiet, which made her feel afraid. Something was wrong, because neither family could find Jesus or Carla or figure out what happened. They went to the police. The focus of both the investigation and the public quickly zeroed in on the Planta Baja nightclub, where Carla and Jesus were last seen. The first days quickly turned into a battle. The club's owners refused to cooperate. They would not hand over security footage. They would not allow the families inside. They demanded a court order. Furious and desperate, relatives staged protests outside the entrance, but the doors stayed shut. It wasn't until January 4th that investigators finally gained access. What they found inside raised every possible red flag. The club was operating without a valid license. Security cameras were installed, but none of them were recording. They were props, meant to deter, not document. That meant that the most critical hours of the disappearance were lost forever. The owner's statements then shifted. First, he told police he personally escorted Carla and Jesus outside. Under pressure, he suddenly changed his version, saying it had been a security guard who walked them out. The inconsistency only deepened suspicion. Samples were taken at the club. Hope soared when investigators found blood on the floor. Media outlets speculated that this was the break everyone was waiting for. However, DNA testing destroyed the theory. The blood didn't belong to either victim. Days passed in vain. With no evidence inside Planta Baja, the investigation pivoted. Detectives turned to phone data. Both victims' phones had remained active after they vanished, and the signals were tracked. That digital trail led investigators into a black market of stolen devices. The first major development came from Jesus's phone. Police traced the chain further and reached a taxi driver and his brother. Both admitted they had bought the phone cheaply from someone on the street. Then, on January 17, detectives made a breakthrough. A deep analysis of Jesus's phone geolocation history led them to Israel Leon, a man who had also been at the club that night. Through him, police uncovered a wider circle: Israel's siblings, Elliot and Michaela LF, as well as their partners, Renzo C. and Estefany. What emerged was chilling. According to case files, Carla and Jesus's original group had left the venue much earlier, but Carla and Jesus did not leave with them. Instead, they stayed behind and mingled with a new group, the Leon brothers, whom they had just met at the club. They continued drinking until the club finally closed its doors around 9 in the morning. In broad daylight, the entire group stepped outside. This 4-hour window, from 5 o'clock a.m. to 9 o'clock a.m., dramatically reframed the case. Carla and Jesus were no longer surrounded by familiar faces. They had spent nearly half the night with strangers, fueled by alcohol and a false sense of camaraderie. A nearby business security camera captured the last known footage of them alive: Carla, Jesus, and 3 men, Israel, Elliot, and Renzo C., talking to a taxi driver on the sidewalk. 2 women, Michaela LF and Estefany, were also with them. Eventually, the entire group climbed into cars, planning to continue partying at Israel's house. On the way, they stopped at a roadside stall to buy more alcohol. When they finally arrived at Israel's house, the exhaustion from a sleepless night, combined with heavy drinking, began to take hold. Carla, completely drained, fell asleep almost as soon as she walked in. Israel, the host, passed out in another room. That left 4 people awake in the kitchen. Jesus, Elliot, Renzo, and Estefany. They continued drinking. But with every passing minute, the atmosphere shifted, the party energy died. The room grew tense. Something was brewing. Something dark. Around 11 o'clock am. Everything changed. Elliot suddenly began berating Jesus, accusing him of pouring drinks the wrong way. What began as mocking turned into sharp insults. As Jesus sobered up, he realized something was wrong. Both his and Carla's phones were missing. He confronted the group, demanding the devices back. Frustrated, he reached toward Elliot's pockets to check for himself. That single moment of physical contact exploded into violence. Elliot punched him. One blow became many. The loud fight woke Israel. Instead of stopping him, he also rushed at Jesus. Renzo followed. The three men took turns beating Jesus. The two young women, Michaela and Estefany, were present when the violence began. But according to court documents, they did nothing to intervene. Jesus, dazed, wounded, barely conscious, was dragged into another room. Carla, still sleeping and heavily intoxicated, was defenseless. When she awoke, terrified and confused, the three attackers turned their rage on her. What happened in that room was brutal. Afterwards, they moved her to the same room where Jesus lay unconscious. The violence continued. The tragic climax came when Jesus regained consciousness. He saw what was being done to Carla and tried to intervene. That act of protection cost him his life. One of the men grabbed a heavy metal pipe and struck Jesus on the head. The blow was fatal. He died almost instantly. With Jesus dead, the attackers turned the heavy metal pipe on Carla. The same pipe was used to take her life. When the final blow landed, the house fell eerily silent. The murderers didn't flee. They stayed in the house for almost 2 whole days, eating, sleeping, and talking, while the bodies decomposed nearby. Only when the streets quieted at night on January 3rd did they act. In the darkness, they wrapped the bodies in coarse jute sacks. The sacks hid the shape, absorbed fluids, and were easier to carry. Instead of using a car, they carried the bodies on foot to the Orcojahuira River, the closest place to dispose of them. They threw the bodies into the river, hoping the current, mud, and passage of time would destroy all traces of the crime. Once investigators had narrowed down the prime suspects, they still needed one crucial piece of evidence: Elliot Leon, described by witnesses as the most violent attacker and the ringleader, had fled. Right away, an international alert was issued. Intelligence reports indicated he was hiding in Sao Paulo, Brazil. A romantic partner who assisted his escape was later investigated for harboring a fugitive. The next phase of the case would unfold beyond Bolivia's borders. The search came to an end on January 26, 2018, when Brazilian authorities finally located and arrested Elliot Leon. He was detained in Sao Paulo and extradited to Bolivia, where investigators were already waiting. During interrogation, Elliot and Israel admitted to participating in the assault and acts of violence, but they fiercely denied delivering the fatal blows with the metal pipe. Elliot claimed that Israel was the one who struck Jesus and Carla, while Israel insisted the opposite, accusing Elliot of being the killer. They understood that whoever had wielded the metal pipe could face the harshest punishment. But for the prosecution, the distinction was irrelevant. The case was defined as a joint criminal act, a coordinated group assault. No role existed in isolation. When the bodies were taken to the morgue, forensic pathologists encountered contradictions that briefly disrupted the investigation. Autopsies confirmed the cause of death. Both victims had suffered massive traumatic brain injuries with significant internal bleeding. Carla's body also showed multiple injuries consistent with violence inflicted while she was still alive. The controversy emerged from the estimated time of death. Early medical reports gave conflicting dates. Jesus was listed as having died on January 4th, while Carla's report suggested she might have lived until January 11th. This raised a terrifying theory. that the victims had been held captive for over a week, possibly tortured. While their families were still begging authorities to find them, the possibility shattered the parents. They endured a new wave of grief, tormented by the idea that their children might have been saved. Eventually, the theory was completely dismissed. Forensic specialists explained that the bodies had been sealed inside thick jute sacks and submerged in river water, creating an abnormal microenvironment that altered decomposition. Once the medical data was matched with witness statements and confessions, authorities confirmed the truth. Carla and Jesus died in the early morning of January 1st, only a few hours after leaving the Planta Baja Club. There was no extended captivity. The trial lasted more than 20 months. The 5 main defendants in the case were Elliot Leon, Israel Leon, Michaela L.F. Leon, Renzo C. Caceres, and Estefany Guizada. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence proving their participation in the violent acts. In the end, the court delivered the maximum possible punishment under Bolivian law: 30 years in prison without parole for each of them, on charges of femicide, homicide, aggravated assault, and complicity. At a farewell mass, the parents held a symbolic wedding for Carla and Jesus. The young couple had planned to marry after graduation. Now, surrounded by flowers and mourners, their families granted them that wish. They were posthumously declared husband and wife. The perpetrators had taken everything from them except their love. That symbolic wedding was a powerful act of resistance. The families refused to let the story end in horror. Instead, they created another ending, one filled with dignity, tenderness. What if a young woman could disappear in one of the world's largest cities without leaving a trace? What if every clue conflicted with the last? Every witness remembered something different, and the people who claimed to help her were the ones putting her in danger. This is the story of Corinna Slusser, a 19-year-old who came to New York City, hoping for a fresh start, only to be pulled into a world of manipulation, false promises, and hidden threats behind friendly faces. In the weeks before she vanished, Corinna shared glamorous photos and optimistic captions online, trying to appear in control while her life unraveled. Strained relationships, risky friendships, and the growing influence of 2 men who would ultimately shape her fate. On September 20th, 2017, she walked out of a motel in Queens and was never seen again. To understand how she ended up there, alone, vulnerable, and isolated, we must return to the beginning, to the life she was struggling to rebuild before everything fell apart. Corinna Slusser was born on March 6, 1998, in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. After her parents divorced, she was raised by her mother, Sabina Tuordo. Corinna was an outgoing, engaged student who did well academically. In high school, she often took part in cheerleading, kept up with makeup and fashion trends, and maintained an Instagram account to share positive images of herself and her future dreams. Corinna had dreamed of becoming a makeup artist. However, in 2016, signs of trouble began to appear. She changed her friends, started skipping school, and was influenced by a new group. That same year, she was arrested for petty theft, which marked a turning point in her behavior. She grew irritable, distanced herself from her family, and often came home with expensive things she couldn't afford, worrying her mother. By spring 2017, Corinna was in emotional and mental distress. In April, she attempted self-harm and was hospitalized. After being discharged, she moved to Hazleton to live with a friend and start over. She got a job as a waitress at a cheap restaurant. probably an Applebee's or something similar. At first, life was relatively stable. She had a job, a small income, but was independent. But soon, she began spending more than she earned and sought easy money. Messages later showed that she started seeing men who gave her gifts, cash, and helped with her living expenses. At first, she described this as being a sugar baby, but it quickly became an unhealthy dependency. As her financial problems grew, tensions rose between her and her friend, and eventually, she had nowhere to stay. Her relationship with her mother also completely broke down. Her mother, Sabina, warned her of the danger she was in, but she reacted with anger. On Instagram, Corinna consistently posted glamorous, filtered photos with confident captions, saying she was strong and about to move into her first apartment. Despite the fact that she was living in unstable, temporary housing, her posts then transitioned to photos taken in random apartments and rundown motels, showing her life in increasing chaos. By summer 2017, Corinna's situation had worsened. Financial stress, conflicts with her mother, and dependence on online relationships made her vulnerable to exploitation. What had once felt like freedom turned into a series of bad decisions. During this time, she met a 32-year-old man named Giovanni Peguero, who promised her a new beginning in New York City. On August 19, 2017, Corinna arrived in New York and was picked up by Giovanni. He seemed confident and caring, and told her he would help her find an apartment and a steady job. He took her to the Harlem Vista Hotel, paid for a few nights, and said it was just a temporary place to stay until they found an apartment and a job. Corinna trusted him, since she was in a strange city and didn't know anyone. At first, everything seemed fine. Giovanni brought her meals, took her shopping, and stayed close to her. He slowly began controlling her, telling her who to speak to, taking her ID and documents to help with apartment paperwork, and monitoring her phone. Gradually, he commented on her photos and scolded her whenever she talked to other men. Corinna didn't realize she was being manipulated. By August 21, they began arguing. He accused her of disappointing him and demanded she act the right way. He only allowed her to go out with him, isolated her from friends, blocked her contacts, and undermined her relationship with her mother, insisting no one cared about her except him. Corinna was becoming trapped and cut off from the outside world. On August 25, the first known violent incident occurred. Giovanni attacked Corinna in her Harlem Vista hotel room, pushing her onto the bed, choking her and screaming. Corinna said that the reason was because he took $300 from her. Corinna called the police, who documented her injuries and took her statement. Giovanni was arrested and charged with assault and strangulation. After Giovanni's arrest, Corinna was left in complete isolation. She had no papers, no money, and no one to help her. She only had enough money to stay in a hotel for a few days, and then she was forced to leave. Although she told her friends she was managing fine and staying in control, her situation was steadily deteriorating. Without identification, she couldn't find work, rent a place, or access official support. Despite this, Corinna stayed in New York, with no intention of returning home due to her strained relationship with her mother. She began searching online for places to stay, meeting men through apps and social media. Although she continued to post smiling pictures and positive quotes on Instagram, in reality, she had to spend the night at the homes of strangers, men she met online. They offered her temporary shelter or a little help in exchange for her attention. These arrangements were unsafe and unstable, leaving her increasingly vulnerable. Some men shared her personal information, demanded intimate photos, or suggested posting escort ads for her online. By early September 2017, her photos appeared on escort service websites. They were likely posted without her consent, and while no name was listed, her friends easily recognized her. The phone numbers in the ads changed frequently, and some pictures were altered. even though she wasn't yet controlled by one person. She was already being drawn into exploitation. Around that time, a 21-year-old man, Ishi Woni, contacted her. He knew Giovanni and, as later became clear, operated within the same circles. Ishi offered to help Corinna through her ordeal, promising safe housing and financial support. He presented himself as knowledgeable and trustworthy, and convinced her to move temporarily to the Haven Motel in Queens. But this was the first step in making her completely dependent on him. Within days at the Haven Motel, Ishi began posting ads with her photos. He set the prices, wrote the descriptions, and controlled all communication with clients. Corinna was forced to obey his rules. Their messages show his dominance. He demanded constant updates, obedience, and gratitude. Her movements were restricted, and he tracked her phone. And she gradually lost all freedom. At the motel, there were other girls in similar situations. The tension increased, leading to competition, jealousy, and conflict. Corinna sometimes resisted or tried to act on her own but soon backed down, uncertain where to find help. By then, her identity was tied to multiple online profiles and phone numbers, trapping her deeper in exploitation. Technically, she was free to leave, but without money, ID, or support, escape was nearly impossible. On September 20, 2017, Corinna was last seen leaving the motel. Witnesses and security footage confirmed her departure. From that moment, she vanished. By the time she was declared missing, she had already fallen under someone else's control. What began as an offer of help ended with her losing all autonomy. At first, no one realized she was missing. Given the chaos in her life, her silence didn't seem unusual. Friends assumed she had changed her phone number, and her mother thought she was simply upset. Several days passed before anyone understood that something was truly wrong. In late September, Sabina Tuordo, Corinna's mother, returned from Florida and found the house unusually quiet. Corinna wasn't answering messages, and all the belongings she'd left before leaving for New York were still untouched. Sabina then contacted the Bloomsburg Police Department. Initially, officers treated it as a voluntary disappearance by an adult. But when Sabina presented a copy of the restraining order against Giovanni, along with letters he had sent after his arrest, the case was transferred to New York authorities. Investigators began examining Corinna's online activity and financial records. One of the first leads took them to the Haven Motel in Queens. The manager confirmed that a young woman matching Corinna's description had stayed there in September with a younger man who paid in cash. She appeared tired and spoke very little. The last sighting of her was on September 20th. After she left, the room remained empty for 2 days until housekeeping arrived. Inside, staff found a few belongings, makeup, a pharmacy receipt, and an empty purse. But her phone, identification, and clothes were gone. Police later discovered that the room was booked under a false name, and the payments were traced to Ishi's debit card. When questioned, Ishi claimed that Corinna had left on her own and denied knowing where she went. He said she had been communicating with someone from the Bronx, but offered no further details. Investigators also found that his phone had been wiped and the SIM card replaced. A digital investigation revealed that, in the week before her disappearance, Corinna had visited escort service websites using her phone. Although her listings had been deleted, cached copies were recovered. They had been posted from IP addresses in the Bronx and Queens, the same areas where Ishi and his associates operated. The ads were created in batches, using similar wording, descriptions, and photos of different women. As the investigation expanded, authorities found links between Corinna and people connected to a man named Giovanni Pagero. One witness confirmed that Corinna had worked with their group for a short time before another guy, who matched Ishi's description, took over. This was the first time police confirmed that Giovanni and Ishi were part of the same network. Though solid proof was still lacking, No one had reported abuse, and Corinna was legally an adult. By November 2017, investigators began to suspect that Corinna might have been taken out of New York. They checked transportation hubs and reviewed surveillance footage but found no sign of her. The last signal from her phone came late at night on September 20th in the Bronx, after which it went silent permanently. The case came to a standstill. Reports repeatedly mentioned three names: Corinna, Giovanni, and Ishi. Everything pointed to that final day, but what happened afterward remained uncertain. She could have left voluntarily, met with harm, or been transferred to another network. None of these theories could be confirmed. Corinna's mother, Sabina, refused to give up. As the official investigation slowed, she became determined to keep attention on her daughter's case. She began by posting on Facebook, contacting journalists, and writing to the police. Most of the time, she received only standard replies. The investigation is ongoing. Concerned the case would fade from memory, she started reaching out to online communities focused on missing persons. Corinna's photos began circulating on forums and public groups across New York City. Sabina personally searched listings, sometimes thinking she recognized her daughter in new images. Every lead she found, she passed on to investigators, who always promised to follow up. By November 2017, Sabina realized that it was necessary to attract public attention. She spoke with local TV stations in Pennsylvania and shared details about Giovanni's arrest and Corinna's last known stay at the Haven Motel. That media coverage was the first major breakthrough. The story spread quickly online, and strangers began contacting her about sightings of Corinna on the subway, in Atlantic City, and elsewhere. Sabina passed all the information to the police, which led to dozens of leads, none of which were ever verified. Still, the growing attention ensured that Corinna's case could not be forgotten. Sabina then created a page called Help Find Corinna Slusser to raise awareness and collect funds for a reward. Within a month, thousands of people had joined. Volunteers helped design flyers and share posts online. Sabina traveled to New York herself, posting flyers throughout the Bronx and Queens. On one occasion, she was fined for unauthorized posting. At the same time, a legal battle began to unfold. Sabina hired a lawyer and demanded that her daughter's case be included in a federal anti-trafficking initiative. Her efforts paid off. The case was reclassified from a voluntary disappearance to a high-risk missing person investigation with suspected exploitation. That changed everything. Homeland Security became involved, investigating Ishi's connections, looking for other victims, and tracking similar criminal networks. Corinna's name was added to the Federal Missing Persons Database. In December 2017, the FBI offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the case. The story spread nationwide. Under media pressure, Ishi was questioned again. He denied all involvement, claiming Corinna was an adult who had made her own choices. He insisted he hadn't seen her after September 20th and didn't know where she went. Then a breakthrough came. One of Ishi's former acquaintances, a young woman, contacted Sabina's attorney. She described a darker reality: manipulation, threats, rules, and debts that kept the girls trapped. Leaving without permission, she said, was considered betrayal. This was the first circumstantial evidence that Corinna had not voluntarily disappeared. Sabina refused to give up. She visited shelters, spoke with staff at victim support organizations, shared Corinna's photo, and left her contact information. By January 2018, other mothers began reaching out to Sabina. Their daughters had vanished under similar circumstances. Online connections, promises of opportunities, trips to New York, and then silence. Sabina realized her daughter's case wasn't an isolated event. She started collaborating with anti-trafficking groups and speaking publicly. Sabina came to accept several possibilities. Corinna might have been taken. She might have died, or she could be hiding, too afraid to return. But as long as Corinna wasn't found, there was still hope. and Sabina fought to keep that hope alive, for herself and for others. Meanwhile, investigators gathered every piece of evidence they could. They interviewed everyone connected to the case, analyzed online activity, and traced IP addresses linked to Corinna. Still, no major breakthroughs emerged. She had vanished in a city where hundreds go missing. The evidence was weak, the witnesses uncertain, and nothing concrete enough to press charges. Sabina continued her work alone. She kept detailed notes of every call, message, and new lead. This record later became the foundation for a public database that tracked Corinna's disappearance almost hour by hour. Sabina's persistence kept the case alive. While investigators stayed silent, she spoke out. As the city moved on, her voice became the last one, speaking for a daughter the world had almost forgotten. When Corinna Slusser's case was made a federal matter, several agencies stepped in: the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, and Homeland Security. They believe her disappearance was related to abuse, which allowed them to use more advanced investigative tools, including telecommunications data and restricted databases from classified advertising websites. Agents started by reviewing Corinna's digital trail. They traced phone numbers and IP addresses, uncovering dozens of ads featuring her images. Some had been posted in October and November 2017, after she went missing, suggesting someone continued to use her likeness. The ads didn't mention her name but matched her images exactly, right down to poses, angles, and identifying marks. The phone numbers change frequently, but some have been linked to previous criminal investigations involving escorts. The FBI found that many phone numbers had been disguised through call forwarding services. Further analysis showed that some of these lines were registered under the names of women previously linked to Ishiwani. This led agents to broaden the list of potential accomplices and revealed that Ishi's operations were well organized and extensive, not just the work of one man. The scheme involved fake advertisements, proxies, and rental properties obtained with forged documents. Search warrants were issued for Ishi's digital devices and those of his associates. The seized smartphones contained key evidence: photos of Corinna Slusser, encrypted client chats, and audio messages with direct orders and threats. Investigators also found group conversations about prices, meeting places, and how often encounters occurred. The repeated phrase, "she can't say no," appeared in multiple messages, combined with victim statements. This showed that Corinna had no control over her situation and had been coerced. The FBI interviewed dozens of women who had worked with Ishi. Their testimonies varied. Some were frightened, others had left earlier, and a few still felt afraid of him. Some remembered hearing Corinna's name, while others saw her picture on Ishi's phone. Several admitted that Ishi rotated ad listings among different women depending on availability or client payment, which explained why Corinna's name and photos kept appearing even after her disappearance. Meanwhile, investigators tracked transportation and surveillance data from Queens and the Bronx, placing Ishi near the Haven Motel. Footage from the day Corinna vanished showed him leaving the motel alone, without any belongings. Although Ishi claimed he didn't know what happened to her, his actions told a different story. Motel logs and call records showed he continued to use Corinna's phone number after September 20, directly contradicting his statements and deepening suspicion that he was hiding information. Federal prosecutors began preparing formal charges. The main charge focused on human trafficking under aggravated circumstances, including coercion, threats, and exploitation of a minor. Corinna was 19 when she met Ishi, and investigators believed her trafficking was part of a broader organized network. Authorities also investigated other women's cases linked to Ishi to establish a pattern of exploitation, building the case even without a recovered body. The search for Corinna targeted every location associated with Ishi: rented properties, places he visited, and transportation hubs. Multiple raids produced little direct evidence related to Corinna, but in one operation, investigators found belongings of another young woman who later reported she had been abused by Ishi. Her testimony strengthened the prosecution's case and supported a broader indictment. By spring 2018, the investigation entered a new phase. Authorities formed an international task force, suspecting Corinna might have been taken out of the country to Canada or the Dominican Republic. Interpol was contacted, but no biometric data matched. Investigators concluded there were only two likely outcomes. Corinna was either deceased or being held somewhere in the US. Completely isolated, the FBI expanded its list of suspects to at least 6 individuals connected to Ishi and the online ads. None could confirm seeing Corinna after September 20, and none provided concrete leads on her whereabouts. The investigation ran into a common but intractable problem: no body, no direct witnesses, and no clear endpoint. But thanks to the evidence they gathered, dozens of gigabytes of data, testimony from other women, and digital clues, investigators built a solid case. All of it suggested that Corinna's disappearance was not voluntary, but part of a larger criminal operation. Her story became a disturbing reminder of how easily someone can disappear in the digital age, how a young woman can vanish in weeks, unseen, despite a nationwide effort to bring her back into the light. By 2022, the federal investigation into Corinna Slusar's disappearance had concluded. After years of gathering evidence, prosecutors filed charges against Ishi Wani, who was convicted of human trafficking and exploiting multiple women. At least 6 young women were confirmed as victims of his crimes. Although Corinna was not the central focus of the prosecution, her disappearance remained unexplained. Substantial circumstantial evidence suggested Ishi's likely involvement. The U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York sentenced him to 10 years in federal prison without parole and ordered him to pay restitution to several victims. This sentencing was notable, as it represented one of the few cases in which a trafficker received a lengthy prison term despite the absence of a body or direct physical evidence in a major episode of the case. Attention also turned again to Giovanni Peguero. His arrest on August 25, 2017, was the only recorded legal action taken against him. He was never formally charged in connection with Corinna's disappearance. Despite his key role in bringing her to New York, a pivotal moment in her story, he was not named as a suspect in the federal case. Corinna's name surfaced in court not as a witness or defendant, but as a symbol of a young woman lost in the gray area between the internet, the streets, and a justice system that moved too slowly. Her case prompted changes in how law enforcement investigates digital exploitation and the targeting of vulnerable women. Yet, for her mother, no verdict could bring closure. Corinna's body was never found, and her disappearance remains unsolved. In a quiet seaside town, what began as a simple late-night stroll between 2 former school friends, Michaela and Jaliek Keene, who had recently returned from overseas, quickly turned into one of the most shocking cases the community had ever faced. The next morning, Michaela was missing. Her phone was found left on campus. And within 48 hours, the search teams made a horrifying discovery. They found Michaela's body with brutal injuries. She had been savagely murdered and her body hidden in the woods. Michaela Conley had lived in Bar Harbor for 19 years with her mother and stepfather. Bar Harbor, located on Mount Desert Island near Acadia National Park, is a small town known for its natural beauty and steady stream of tourists. On May 31, 2018, she drove to Boston to pick up her friend, Jaliek Keene, at Logan Airport and bring him back her home. Michaela and Jaliek had gone to the same school, Mount Desert Island High School. Jalik graduated in 2015, while Michaela was still in the 10th grade. He played on the school's soccer team and had recently returned from Serbia, where he had been playing for an amateur club called the Kova Royal Crowns. They returned to her house later that evening. Around 2 a.m., Michaela and Jalik decided to go out for a walk. But Michaela never came home. The next morning, Jalik went back to Michaela's house and told her mother that he was there to retrieve his cell phone, wallet, which he claimed he had left in Michaela's room. Her mother, Danielle Timoney, was surprised to learn that Michaela had not returned the previous night. Jalik told her they had gotten into an argument and that he had walked away, leaving Michaela alone. According to him, he hadn't seen her since. Danielle immediately contacted the police to report her daughter missing. That same morning, Michaela's cell phone was found on the grounds of the Connors Emerson School. A school employee turned it over to Danielle, who confirmed it belonged to her daughter. Further investigation revealed that at 2:19 a.m. on June 1, 2018, a video had been uploaded to Snapchat from Michaela's phone. The footage clearly showed Michaela and Jalik together at a playground near the Connors Emerson School. Then, on June 2, 2018, a team of search and rescue dogs from the Maine State Police discovered human remains in a wooded area near Connors Emerson High School. The body was partially hidden beneath bamboo stalks and other vegetation. The remains were later confirmed to be those of Michaela Conley. Initial examination results indicated Michaela suffered head and facial injuries from a blunt object, as well as signs of strangulation. Additional abrasions, bruises across her torso, and limbs indicated that her body had been dragged and sustained further injuries. In the medical examiner's opinion, Michaela died from a combination of head trauma and strangulation. Her death was officially ruled a homicide. Jalik was questioned, even before Michaela's body was discovered. Detectives Jason Fuller and Paul White of the Maine State Police conducted the interview. During questioning, Jalik admitted that Michaela had picked him up from Logan Airport and driven him back to Bar Harbor. He said he spent time with her at her house until the early hours of the morning. He confirmed that they had entered the Connors Emerson campus together around 2 a.m., which was later verified through surveillance footage. He claimed they spent about an hour on school grounds, during which they kissed and intimate. Afterward, he said Michaela became upset, and they argued. Jalik showed investigators scratches on his back, saying she scratched him. He insisted that he left her around 3:30 a.m. and never saw her again. On June 3, investigators conducted a site walkthrough with Jalik before questioning him again. Investigators then obtained video from surveillance cameras around the school. After reviewing the footage, they determined that at 2:17 a.m., Michaela and Jalik were walking along the path from Eden Street toward Connors Emerson School. They then moved out of view toward the playground on the Eden Street side. Another camera mounted on the building facing Eden Street captured the next moments. Although the footage was grainy and partially obscured by a cobweb, investigators were able to identify a figure believed to be Michaela. A man resembling Jalik approached her. After a brief interaction, he lifted her onto his shoulder and walked away while she struggled visibly, kicking her legs wildly. At approximately 7:05 a.m., the video shows a person pushing a lawnmower out of frame. Moments later, Jalik appeared from behind a row of bushes with Michaela's lifeless body. He grabbed her wrist and carried her quickly toward the wooded area where her remains were later found. He was wearing the same black clothing seen earlier in the night, and the distinctive tattoo on his left forearm, noticed by detectives during his interview, was clearly visible. The footage directly contradicted his repeated claim that he had left Michaela at 3:30 a.m. and never saw her again. No other individuals appeared on any of the footage. Following the discovery of the body and the review of surveillance footage, Jalik was arrested and charged, but he continued to claim innocence. About 50 of Michaela's relatives and friends filled the courtroom during the trial. State prosecutors stated that Jalik's DNA was found under Michaela's fingernails and inside her body. Physically, she never stood a chance against him. Michaela was only 5'4" and weighed about 95 pounds, while Jalik was 6 feet tall and had weighed 180 pounds in 2015, according to his profile on the West Virginia University soccer team roster. The defense attorney argued that the state's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and that prosecutors could not definitively prove that Jalik killed Michaela. He suggested someone else might have been on the school grounds and managed to evade the cameras. He noted that cigarette butts and an empty alcohol bottle found on the playground had never been examined to identify potential alternative suspects. He argued that the state lacked concrete proof of exactly how Michaela was fatally injured. According to him, the circumstantial evidence did not lead to certainty, only speculation. During the trial, Jalik was shown a video, recorded on the grounds of Connors Emerson School, that appeared to show him carrying Michaela's lifeless body and, later, washing himself at a urinal. Jalik claimed he had no memory of the events captured in the footage. Both prosecution and defense questioned him extensively. He said he had been awake for nearly 36 hours, having just returned from an international flight from Serbia, where he had been playing soccer. According to him, he remembered nothing from that early morning until he arrived at Michaela's house, where he had supposedly left his phone and wallet. In May 2019, the jury found Jalik Keene guilty. The verdict was formally delivered on September 11. During sentencing, the judge remarked that Keene's refusal to fully accept responsibility, despite the video evidence, was appalling. He added that it was equally disturbing that Keene went to Michaela's mother only minutes after killing her, pretending to be concerned for her daughter. Jalik Keene, 22, was sentenced to 58 years in prison for murder, along with an additional 30 years on related charges, to be served concurrently. Crystal Beira Nieves moved to New York from Puerto Rico in 2019 with her mother and 14-year-old brother. Over time, they settled into their new life. Crystal and her brother attended school, while their mother, Christy, found work and did everything she could to support her children. In 2021, Crystal graduated from high school and began searching for a job, but without formal qualifications. Her options were limited, and she applied for a position at the Burger King on 116th Street in East Harlem, just a few blocks from their apartment. Working as a cashier at a fast food restaurant wasn't what she envisioned for herself. She dreamed of going to college and learning a skilled profession that would lead to better opportunities. For now, however, Crystal focused on saving money to buy her first car, something she wanted to earn entirely on her own. Crystal faced several challenges during her early days on the job. Her initial work schedule placed her on night shifts. East Harlem had long struggled with social issues, including high crime rates, and Crystal felt understandably uneasy about working late hours. Homeless individuals often gathered outside the restaurant at night, and this frightened her. Concerned for her safety, she asked her manager to move her to the day shift. She was promised the schedule change beginning January 14, 2022. As she worked through her final days on the night shift, the anxiety only grew stronger. On the evening of January 9, 2022, Crystal prepared to leave for one of her last late-night shifts. Before stepping out, she told her mother she didn't want to go because she was afraid of the people who lingered around the restaurant after dark. But her mother insisted Crystal needed to take responsibility and finish her assigned shifts. Crystal went to work, and that was the last time her mother ever saw her alive. Upon arriving, Crystal changed into her uniform and began her shift. The Burger King operated 24/7, but there was no security presence. Around 1 a.m., a man dressed entirely in black, wearing a ski mask and holding a gun, walked into the restaurant. At that moment, there was no one on site who could protect the staff or customers. A customer sitting at a table became his first victim. He was struck on the head with the butt of the gun. The attacker then turned to the 59-year-old manager and violently punched her in the face before heading toward the front counter. Standing behind Crystal, he aimed the gun at her, demanded that she open the cash register and hand over all the money. Crystal obeyed immediately. She opened the drawer, took out the cash, and handed it to him. But there was only $100 inside. In a fit of rage, the man pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Crystal squarely in the chest. Once the gunman fled, the injured manager called 911. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes, and Crystal was rushed to the hospital. Despite doctors' efforts, she could not be saved. Officers secured the crime scene, but the attacker had already disappeared. The customer who had been struck and the manager who was assaulted told investigators everything they could recall. Both stated clearly that Crystal had not resisted. She followed every command. Yet he shot her anyway. The New York Police Department released an image of the suspect, though the mask hid his face. They hoped someone might recognize his clothing or build. A $1,000 reward was announced for information leading to his arrest, and within days, it increased to $20,000. The loss shattered Crystal's family. Her life was only just beginning, and now her loved ones were planning her funeral. A memorial quickly formed outside the Burger King, where neighbors and strangers lit candles and placed flowers. Hundreds contributed to an online fundraiser to support the family. Christie decided to bury her daughter in Puerto Rico, their homeland. The fundraiser surpassed its goal, and JetBlue Airways provided free flights for the family. Meanwhile, police continued working around the clock. Flyers featuring the suspect were posted across the city and widely circulated online. Local news outlets covered the case heavily. Soon, there was hardly anyone in New York who hadn't heard the heartbreaking story of Crystal's death. 5 days after the shooting, police announced an arrest. Investigators had pieced together the suspect's movements through surveillance footage from multiple locations. On Friday, January 14, 2022, officers arrested Winston Glynn, 30, at a residence in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. In nearby dumpsters, they recovered several items he had used the night of the robbery. Detectives also located the cell phone he had stolen from the restaurant manager and thrown into a subway tunnel. Additional CCTV footage showed Glynn making an electronic purchase at a convenience store just an hour before the attack. Glynn, a Jamaican national living in a homeless shelter, was charged with first-degree murder, first-degree robbery, and several other offenses. Authorities confirmed that he had previously worked at the same Burger King in 2020, giving him detailed knowledge of the store's layout. The day before the killing, Glynn had entered the restaurant pretending to be a regular customer, an act investigators believe was part of his preparation. They concluded he had targeted the location because he knew it lacked security and had easy access points. Glynn did not know Crystal personally. He had quit long before she was hired. When police escorted Glynn out of the shelter in handcuffs and leg irons, he shouted angrily at a crowd of onlookers. People gathered outside the precinct jeered at him as officers led him to the car. During his court appearance, Glynn repeatedly accused the judge of lying. He was denied bail. At a later hearing, Glynn compared himself to Nelson Mandela and Jesus Christ. He also criticized how long it took witnesses to identify him, insisting the justice system mistreated people from the lower class like him. Glynn made bizarre comments about the Freemasons and the Illuminati, claiming powerful families profited from chaos in the city. His criminal record included at least 4 prior arrests, among them threatening someone with a weapon in November 2021 and illegal firearm possession in December 2020. Glynn pleaded not guilty to Crystal Bayron Nieves' murder. If convicted of first-degree murder, he faces life imprisonment without parole. Court proceedings continued for months, drawing significant public attention. Despite Glynn's erratic courtroom behavior and repeated proclamations of innocence, the evidence, surveillance footage, witness accounts, and physical findings consistently pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. The community followed the case closely, hoping for justice for Crystal and her family. For her loved ones, the loss remained unbearable. But the arrest and prosecution of Winston Glynn marked a critical step toward closure. The bodies made the tragedy even harder to comprehend. Now, investigators faced the enormous task of reconstructing every detail of the crime to identify whoever was responsible. At this time, Jennifer Harbison, 17 years old, is an energetic, ambitious, and hardworking girl. She was set to graduate the following year and planned to attend college afterward. Jennifer participated in sports and was a proud member, and even president, of the Future Farmers of America, a non-profit student organization focused on agricultural education. Her sister, 15-year-old Sarah, was also a student at the same school. She participated in the same organization, played basketball and volleyball, served on the student council, and was widely known as outgoing, energetic. She was dating a young man who had recently given her a ring as a symbol of his love. Tragically, that ring was later found melted beside her body. 17-year-old Eliza Thomas was also involved in the Future Farmers of America. She lived with her mother, while her father lived separately. During this period, she held 2 part-time jobs to help support her mom, even though she was still unsure of what she wanted to pursue in the future. The youngest victim, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, was a close friend of Sarah's. They didn't see each other regularly because they attended different schools, but whenever they spent time together, they enjoyed each other's company and fit naturally into the group. Amy is also a member of the same organization, Future Farmers of America, and it was through that program that she met everyone. Family members soon arrived at the scene. They cooperated fully with investigators and described the girl's day leading up to the tragedy. According to their account, Jennifer had visited her boyfriend that afternoon and then stopped by a friend's house before getting ready for her evening shift at the yogurt shop. She and Eliza were scheduled to work late, and afterward, Sarah's boyfriend was supposed to drive Jennifer home. Earlier that day, Amy and Sarah had gone to the stables, each responsible for an animal they were caring for. After leaving the stables, they decided to walk through the mall before heading to the yogurt shop to help Jennifer and Eliza close up for the night. Once closing time came, the plan was to drive home together, even though they lived nearby. This had become their usual routine for safety. Eliza's parents told investigators that nothing seemed unusual when they passed by the yogurt shop later that evening. They stopped to buy yogurt before heading home and saw no one suspicious. They also hadn't heard of any of the girls being stalked or involved in troubling relationships. None of them struggled with behavioral issues, and their rebellious phases were mild at most. Investigators then contacted the store manager. She remained composed until she was informed that 4 bodies had been found inside. The fire itself didn't initially alarm her. She was certain that no one should have been in the store at that hour. The situation felt deeply unsettling. Once it became clear that the scene was a crime scene, forensic experts arrived. They quickly determined that the girls had not died from smoke inhalation or burns. 3 of the victims, Eliza, Jennifer, and Sarah, had been shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber weapon. Amy suffered 2 gunshot wounds, and the bullets came from a different firearm. Because all 4 girls were found naked and bound, investigators initially suspected abuse or attempted assault, but the intense fire and the water used to extinguish it made confirming that difficult. Firefighters had washed down the entire area, likely destroying crucial evidence. What was clear, however, was that the fire had been intentionally set to cover up the crime. Cardboard boxes, napkins, and disposable cups had been stacked over the girls' bodies and ignited, turning the entire space into an inferno. There was no money left in the register, prompting speculation that robbery might have been a motive. Strangely, several of the girls' undergarments and 2 black jackets were missing, suggesting that personal items had been taken. Since there were no signs of forced entry, investigators considered the possibility that the victims may have known their killers. This would explain how the perpetrators gained access without suspicion. Yet detectives also believed the attackers might have simply been late customers. The police began questioning people within the girls' immediate circle. The first person to draw attention was Eliza's ex-boyfriend, Roger. Shortly before the murders, he had asked a friend to call the store while Eliza was working and inquire about all the yogurt flavors. Eliza overheard him laughing in the background. She mentioned the strange behavior to her parents and several friends. While it didn't seem dangerous, investigators followed up on the lead. It wasn't long before Roger and his friend were cleared. He had not been stalking Eliza, nor did he harbor ill intent. The call had simply been a prank, and he had a solid alibi for the night of the murders. After that, the list of potential suspects was empty, so law enforcement increased patrols throughout the area. Officers began checking individuals with criminal histories, especially those known for violence against women. They questioned regular customers at the yogurt shop and canvassed the nearby neighborhoods in hopes of uncovering anything new. 8 days later, a witness contacted the police and reported a suspicious 16-year-old boy. He was often seen hanging around the same shopping mall where Amy and Sarah had walked. The teen drew attention because he frequently carried what appeared to be a .22 caliber gun. When he showed up at the mall again, rumors spread quickly that he and his group of friends might somehow be connected to the murders. The new suspect turned out to be a young man named Maurice Pierce, who was frequently accompanied by a friend named indeed been at the same shopping center around the time of the murders and had even stopped by a frozen yogurt shop. This prompted investigators to arrest Maurice, Forrest, and two of their friends, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott. These two had been with the group when they stole the car and left Austin briefly. Police also believed a girl had been with them at some point, so detectives interviewed her as well. All of them were troubled teens who had dropped out of school, though not all had criminal records. None admitted involvement in the murders, but Maurice agreed to cooperate. Investigators wired a microphone under his clothing and sent him to speak with Forrest. Later, Forrest said he didn't understand why Maurice was asking incriminating questions and insisted he had simply made a tasteless joke about the murders. After a lengthy investigation, detectives realized they had been misled. Maurice had fabricated much of his story during questioning to appear important. All four young men were eventually released, and investigators shifted their focus elsewhere. Because of the severity of the crime, a growing number of witnesses came forward, each with a different account. All were investigated, but none proved reliable. Detectives managed to interview nearly every customer who had visited the yogurt shop that Saturday night. Eventually, a young married couple, Tim and Margaret, came forward. They had purchased yogurt shortly before closing time. While waiting for her order, Margaret noticed two men sitting at a nearby table. Their behavior struck her as odd. They sat almost motionless, seemingly listening closely to the girls at the register and behind the counter. Tim and Margaret left shortly after, as the store was preparing to close, but the two suspicious men remained inside. Unfortunately, Tim and Margaret couldn't describe them clearly. Their faces weren't visible enough. Hypnosis was even attempted, but it produced no useful results. The police had little information, perhaps because the crime scene was examined by around 100 people, who may have contaminated the area and weakened the integrity of the investigation. Even determining how the fire had been started remained unclear. The most plausible explanation was that the killers had used some kind of accelerant to set the victims on fire. But despite extensive searches and forensic testing, investigators were unable to identify exactly what substance had been used. During this time, the victims' families endured not only the devastation of losing their daughters but also relentless media attention. They faced a painful dilemma. No one wanted to repeatedly revisit the horror of the crime, yet speaking publicly seemed necessary to keep the case alive in the minds of detectives, journalists, and the community. They knew that remaining visible might help push the investigation forward. With no promising suspects in the quadruple homicide, Austin police turned to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for assistance. Rick Perry as a result of Roper v. Simmons. The defense attorneys argued that neither defendant had the opportunity to commit the crime. Under intense police pressure, the two young men had been coerced into incriminating one another, and the defense insisted on exercising their full right to cross-examine every witness the prosecution relied on. Their efforts paid off. They demonstrated that the confessions had been extracted under duress, at gunpoint, on the second day of interrogation. Other law enforcement officers later confirmed this. The video recordings of the interrogations were eventually located and submitted in court. Both Robert and Michael testified that they were beaten, insulted, threatened, and humiliated for days until detectives finally obtained what they wanted: forced confessions to the murders. The prosecution suffered its most serious blow when the defense proved that critical information had been misrepresented at trial. The .22 caliber pistol seized from Maurice had been definitively ruled out as the murder weapon after ballistic testing, yet prosecutors continued claiming in court that it was the gun used to execute the victims. In 2006, an appeals court overturned all charges against Michael Scott. 3 years later, in 2009, Robert Springsteen was also cleared. Both men were freed. Public outrage soon erupted against law enforcement, as it became clear that wrongful convictions were not isolated errors but part of a larger pattern. The scandal triggered internal reviews, renewed scrutiny of interrogation methods, and widespread criticism of practices that had ruined the lives of innocent people. The victims' parents told reporters that they never wanted anyone innocent to go to prison. Revenge was not their goal. They only wanted justice, and for the true killer to be held accountable. Yet the central question remained unanswered: who had murdered the 4 girls? The investigation stalled once again. No new evidence emerged, and the old evidence had failed at every stage. Over the years, technology continued to advance. In 2017, a partial DNA profile was discovered during a reanalysis of samples collected from the victims' bodies. This yielded a partial profile that did not match any of the victims. Only 16 genetic markers were found. This number is alarmingly small, but it's enough to compare with other samples and potentially rule out suspects through comparison. Investigators first compared the sample with the profiles of Forrest, Maurice, Michael, and Robert. All were excluded. None matched the DNA from the crime scene. By the end of 2017, detectives discovered that a nearly identical DNA fragment had been stored in a national database. After further analysis, they learned this same unknown profile had appeared in at least one other unsolved crime in the FBI system. The offender had reoffended, but had never been identified. The investigation remained stuck until the yogurt shop murders resurfaced in the public consciousness. Thanks to documentary filmmakers and the persistence of the victims' families, pressure on the case renewed. Another round of DNA comparisons was conducted, and this time, detectives finally discovered the truth. 2 days after the Austin yogurt shop murders, a man had been arrested in El Paso, Texas, while trying to cross the border into Mexico. He was caught driving a stolen car and carrying a firearm. His name was Robert Eugene Brashers. Investigators later learned that Brashers was a violent serial offender, an abuser and murderer responsible for a string of brutal crimes committed between 1990 and 1998 across multiple states, including Kentucky, Missouri, Texas, and South Carolina. Yet, during his lifetime, he was never openly identified as a suspect in any of these cases. Despite his lengthy criminal record, Brasher's involvement in these crimes only came to light decades after his death. This breakthrough was possible solely because of advances in forensic genetic genealogy. Robert Eugene Brashers was born in Newport News, Virginia, raised in Alabama, later served in the U.S. Army. As a young man, he had no serious criminal history, though he was known to use illegal substances and commit minor offenses. In 1980, he moved to the southern United States and initially appeared to lead an ordinary life. He married, had a daughter, later adopted 2 more girls. However, behind this facade of normalcy was an increasingly unstable and dangerous man. His first abuse occurred in 1985 when he pretended to be intoxicated and attacked Michelle Wilkerson in Florida. He abused her after she attempted to resist, then shot her twice, once in the neck and once in the head. Against all odds, she survived and was able to identify him. Her testimony led to Brasher's arrest and conviction. He received a 12-year prison sentence but was released after just 4 years for good behavior on May 4, 1989. Soon after his release from prison, Brashers quickly returned to criminal behavior. He was arrested several times for robbery, trespassing, and illegal possession of firearms. His instability grew more apparent with each passing year. According to family members, his behavior shifted from unpredictable to openly threatening. Later, his daughter Deborah recalled a disturbing incident. Her father once filmed himself cutting into his own leg with a saw, as if testing how much pain he could endure. It was one of many signs that something was deeply wrong. In January 1999, police finally tracked him to a motel in Missouri, where he was hiding with his wife and daughters. Brashers had been pulled over in connection with a carjacking, but instead of surrendering, he opened fire on law enforcement officers. He then barricaded himself inside the motel room and took his family hostage. Negotiators managed to convince him to release them unharmed, but before officers could make an arrest, Brashers turned the gun on himself, shooting himself in the head. He died 6 days later. Only after his death did investigators begin to connect him to a series of violent crimes. Through the use of genetic genealogy, his DNA was matched to multiple unsolved murders and abuse cases. Evidence linked him to the killings of young women in South Carolina, the 1998 Missouri murders, and a pattern of attacks and abuses in Tennessee. Yet, despite this growing body of evidence, it took decades for detectives to confirm his involvement in one of the most infamous cases in Texas history. It wasn't until 2025 that Austin police finally obtained indisputable proof that Robert Eugene Brashers was responsible for the murders of the 4 teenagers in the yogurt shop in 1991. Advanced DNA testing, combined with modern ballistic analysis of archived evidence, revealed a direct match. The .22 caliber pistol used in the Austin murders turned out to be the same weapon with which Brashers had shot himself during the motel standoff in 1999. When the victims' families learned that the killer had taken his own life decades earlier, some described him as a coward, someone who chose an easy escape rather than facing justice. Detectives also believe he killed himself because he suspected he had been exposed and wanted to take all of his secrets to the grave. Yet one June 12, 1994, in Brentwood, Los Angeles, a quiet, affluent neighborhood. Sometime after midnight, Nicole Brown Simpson, 35, and Ronald Goldman, 25, were found dead outside a South Bundy Drive condominium. Both had been stabbed multiple times. The coroner's report indicated the wounds were deep, random, and fatal. Nicole's throat was cut severely, almost to her spine. She also had wounds on her hands, suggesting she tried to defend herself. Goldman appeared to have struggled violently. Evidence suggests he arrived at the scene unexpectedly and was immediately attacked. The crime scene is chaotic. Blood stains the concrete. A single glove lies on the ground. Detectives have ruled out burglary. Nothing valuable was stolen. The violence suggests a personal, targeted attack fueled by rage. Nicole Brown Simpson was known publicly as the ex-wife of O.J. Simpson, a former National Football League superstar, actor, and television personality. Privately, according to police records and later testimony, her life had been marked by repeated domestic violence. In 1989, Simpson admitted guilt in a spousal abuse case without going to trial. Afterward, friends informed investigators that Nicole was afraid of him. She had mentioned leaving him for good and beginning a new life. Police notify Simpson early that morning. He reacts with visible distress. He is not immediately named a suspect. At first, he is treated as a grieving ex-husband, but detectives note inconsistencies, cuts on his hand, a timeline that feels tight, and the history documented, reported, and unresolved. By dawn, the story begins to leak. By afternoon, it consumes the nation. A famous name is now attached to a double homicide, and behind the flashing lights, 2 lives have already ended, quietly and violently, on a dark sidewalk. Before the murders, O.J. Simpson was a beloved figure in America. He was more than just famous, he was well-liked and recognizable. As a Heisman Trophy winner, Hall of Fame running back, and charismatic broadcaster, he effortlessly promoted products like rental cars. His popularity transcended racial divides, and the media portrayed him as approachable, charming, and harmless, a welcome presence in people's homes. However, his private life was a stark contrast. Nicole Brown met Simpson in 1977 when she was 18, and he was already a celebrity. They married in 1985. Within a year, police were frequently called to their residence. In 1989, police reports documented bruises on Nicole's face and body, accompanied by photographs and audio recordings of her expressing fear for her life. Simpson eventually pleaded no contest to spousal abuse, resulting in a fine and community service. Their marriage ended in divorce in 1992. Friends and police interviews revealed that even after the separation, Simpson allegedly continued to control Nicole. He reportedly tracked her activities, showed up unexpectedly, and challenged the men she interacted with. Nicole kept a diary and confided in friends that Simpson would be to blame if anything happened to her. These statements were later presented in court as evidence of her documented fear, not just speculation. Meanwhile, Simpson maintained a normal public life, working on television and attending events. He lived in Rockingham, a secure estate close to Nicole's home, suggesting proximity despite their separation. Investigators later highlighted this contrast: a man publicly known for his composure versus a private history of instability. These two sides of Simpson existed separately, seldom overlapping until the events that followed. On the evening of June 12, 1994, Simpson went to his daughter's dance performance. Witnesses said he seemed upset. He then went back to his house. He was supposed to fly to Chicago later that night, based on flight information. The timing of these events is crucial, even down to the minute, because small gaps in information raise significant questions. As detectives investigated the events leading up to the murders, they began to examine Simpson's life, not just the crime scene. They looked for patterns of behavior, instances where tensions escalated, and situations that might have been overlooked or downplayed. The initial shock gives way to a feeling of unease. This isn't because guilt has been confirmed, but because the circumstances surrounding the case are becoming clearer. Investigators now face a challenge: how to reconcile the image of a trusted figure with the incriminating evidence that continues to surface. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, detectives focus on tangible evidence, physical clues like fibers and blood. At the Bundy Drive crime scene, they find blood droplets leading away from the victims' bodies. They also discover a stained, dark leather left-hand glove. The evidence suggests the killer fled on foot and was likely injured. The investigation then shifts its focus to Rockingham Avenue. Later that morning, detectives arrived at Simpson's estate. They presented the visit as routine. However, they quickly noticed bloodstains. There were small stains on the white Ford Bronco parked outside and more blood inside the vehicle, on the driveway, and at the front entrance. Simpson had a cut on his left hand. He told the officers he had injured it, breaking a glass in Chicago. The officers documented his explanation and the timing of the injury. Inside the house, a right-hand glove matching the one found at the crime scene was discovered behind the guest house. It was the same size and style. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the gloves contained Nicole Brown Simpson's blood, Ronald Goldman's blood, and Simpson's blood. DNA evidence and statistical analysis suggested an extremely low probability that the blood belonged to anyone else. However, evidence is not self-interpreting. People collect it, and systems process it. Problems and inconsistencies began to surface early in the investigation. Defense attorneys later point to how the crime scene was managed. Detectives walked through blood without protective booties. Vials were carried in pockets. Some evidence was logged hours late. One detective, Mark Fuhrman, will later be exposed for racist language and allegations of evidence planting, a revelation that changes everything. The white Bronco becomes a symbol before it becomes evidence. It is slow, ordinary, a vehicle that blends into highways. Yet inside it, according to forensic analysis, are bloodstains consistent with transfer, not injury alone. The prosecution will argue it is a mobile crime scene. The defense will argue contamination, mishandling, reasonable doubt. The pressure increases. Every piece of evidence seems important until someone questions it. Every firm conclusion needs a footnote. The detectives think they're constructing a solid case piece by piece. However, outside the police's control, events unfold rapidly. The media focuses intensely on the story. Public views sharply divide. The case expands beyond official investigations. June 17, 1994, early evening in Los Angeles. Simpson was supposed to surrender at Parker Center. His lawyers announced his intention to turn himself in. News cameras and police officers waited, but he never appeared. At 6:45 p.m., a call reported that Simpson was in the back of a white Ford Bronco, driven by his friend Al Cowlings. He was reportedly armed and emotionally distressed, and according to later released police communications, he was threatening ended his own life. The events happened as they were broadcast live. Helicopters took off, and TV networks broke into their regular shows. An estimated 95 million people watched the white Bronco driving slowly on the freeway at 55 mph. Police cars followed it without using sirens or force. The city was on edge. Later, investigators discovered that Simpson had a disguise, a passport, cash, a family photo, and a handwritten note in the car. The note, addressed to the American people, seemed more like a goodbye than an admission of guilt. He wrote about love, pain, and his inability to continue living. While he didn't confess to the murders, the note had a sense of finality. The situation felt unreal. People gathered on overpasses, cheering, while others watched silently. A man suspected of killing 2 people had become a bizarre form of entertainment. The boundary between a criminal investigation and a media spectacle had disappeared. From the perspective of the investigation, the slow-speed chase was a turning point. While running away doesn't prove someone is guilty, prosecutors would later argue that it showed Simpson knew he was guilty. The defense argued that Simpson was overwhelmed, scared, and mentally unstable. They claimed he wasn't trying to escape, but was in despair. After nearly 2 hours, the Bronco arrived at Simpson's home in Rockingham. Simpson got out of the vehicle and went inside. Police peacefully took him into custody. There was no chase or gunfire. The ending felt strangely calm after the intense events. The following day, Simpson was charged with 2 counts of murder. The case transitioned from the police to the court system, and the pace of events increased. The preceding chase significantly impacted the upcoming trial. The jury pool consisted of people who had watched Simpson flee on live television. Witnesses would testify knowing that the case involved a celebrity. Every legal motion would be examined intensely, considering both legal and cultural implications. The investigation shifted its focus from solely relying on evidence to also examining public perception, trust, and power dynamics. And hanging over it all is a single unresolved tension. Did the spectacle obscure the truth, or did it reveal something the evidence alone could not? January 1995. A Los Angeles courtroom becomes the most watched room in America. Cameras are allowed. Every gesture is recorded. Every word is dissected. What should have been a methodical examination of evidence becomes a daily broadcast. The prosecution is confident in their case. They have blood samples, DNA evidence, gloves, and a timeline that points to Simpson's guilt. Forensic experts found Simpson's blood at the crime scene and the victim's blood in his Bronco and on his property. The prosecution believes the scientific evidence overwhelmingly proves Simpson's involvement. However, the defense doesn't dispute the crime itself. Instead, they attack the integrity of the investigation. Led by Johnny Cochran, the defense team changes the focus. They argue that the evidence is unreliable due to contamination, mishandling, and bias. They heavily focus on Detective Mark Fuhrman, who found a glove at Simpson's estate. Audio tapes reveal Fuhrman repeatedly using racial slurs. When questioned under oath, he denies using those slurs, but the tapes are played, and he then pleads the Fifth Amendment, destroying his credibility. The atmosphere in the courtroom changes. The trial shifts from a murder case to a discussion of race, policing, and historical injustice. The defense suggests that evidence was planted, and that Simpson, a black man, is being framed by a racist system. The prosecution struggles to counter these arguments as moral questions overshadow the scientific evidence. June 15, 1995. The gloves are presented as evidence in court. Simpson is asked to try them on, but he has difficulty and seems uncomfortable. The gloves appear too small. Experts later testified that the gloves had shrunk due to being soaked in blood and then frozen. Simpson was also wearing latex gloves underneath. Despite these explanations, the image of Simpson struggling with the gloves sticks in the jury's minds. The prosecution's case weakens under the intense media attention. The timeline of events becomes unclear, and the jurors seem uninterested. Complex DNA evidence becomes confusing in a courtroom already filled with skepticism. The trial shifts focus from the crime itself to a question of credibility. Who is telling the truth, and why should they be believed? Even though the evidence remains strong as closing arguments near, the loss of trust makes a guilty verdict unlikely. The case now rests in the hands of 12 jurors. And the question becomes unavoidable. When evidence collides with history and perception, which one survives? September 1995. After months of testimony, forensics, and conflicting claims, the jury faces a confusing situation. The legal standard isn't absolute certainty, but whether there's reasonable doubt, and the defense has successfully created doubt. Inside the jury room, the focus shifts to procedure. Jurors re-examine the gloves, blood samples, and timelines. However, Mark Fuhrman's testimony lingers in their minds. The exposure of the detective's dishonesty, seen by some as representative of deeper issues, proves crucial. Post-trial interviews revealed jurors felt Fuhrman's lack of credibility cast suspicion on all the evidence. They reasoned, if one piece was potentially planted, then any of it could be. Despite the prosecution's strong DNA evidence, with experts stating the blood mixtures statistically linked Simpson to the crime with extremely high probability, the defense has changed the focus. They raise questions about lab contamination, mishandling of evidence at the crime scene, and broken chains of custody. They don't directly attack the science itself, but rather those handling it. The nation held its breath outside the courtroom, deeply divided. Public opinion was sharply split along racial lines. Surveys at the time revealed that many Black Americans questioned Simpson's guilt, expressing distrust of the police. In contrast, many white Americans believed the evidence against him was undeniable. The trial had become a stark reflection of the different realities experienced by these groups. October 3, 1995. The jury delivered its verdict after deliberating for less than 4 hours, a surprisingly short time. A hush fell over the courtroom. Millions watched the live broadcast. O.J. Simpson was acquitted. Nicole Brown, Simpson's family, was devastated. Ronald Goldman's family was in stunned disbelief. Across the country, the announcement triggered a wave of reactions. Jubilation in some areas, shock and outrage in others. It was clear that justice appeared differently to different people. Legally, the case is over. Simpson walks free. The presumption of innocence is reaffirmed, but the atmosphere is not one of resolution. It is one of fractures. A sense that the truth has slipped through a narrow procedural gap. The verdict answers one question, decisively, but it leaves another burning beneath it. If criminal court could not deliver certainty, where, if anywhere, would accountability be found? In 1996, the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman sued O.J. Simpson for wrongful death in civil court. This trial had a different legal standard than the criminal trial. Instead of beyond a reasonable doubt, the standard was preponderance of the evidence, meaning it was more likely than not that Simpson was responsible. The civil trial was less sensational, no cameras, quieter atmosphere, and more focus on the evidence. In the courtroom, Simpson testified and answered questions directly in a controlled manner. The attorneys for the Brown and Goldman families presented evidence that the criminal jury had either rejected or not fully considered, such as blood evidence, gloves, and the history of domestic violence. These patterns were presented clearly, without the distractions of a national broadcast. In February 1997, the civil jury found Simpson responsible for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. He was ordered to pay $33.5 million in damages. This was a determination of responsibility in a civil case, not a criminal conviction, so there was no prison sentence. For the families, the ruling brings limited relief. Fred Goldman calls it justice, but incomplete. Nicole's family remains largely silent. According to public statements, no verdict could return what was taken. The civil judgment becomes symbolic. Acknowledgement, rather than closure. Simpson does not pay the damages in full. Years pass. His public image erodes. The charm that once insulated him fades. In 2007, unrelated to the murders, he was arrested in Las Vegas for armed robbery and kidnapping during a dispute over sports memorabilia. In 2008, he was convicted and later sentenced to up to 33 years in prison. Some see irony. Others see coincidence. The murder case is never legally revisited. The broader aftershocks ripple outward. Police departments re-examine evidence handling. Courts debate cameras in trials. DNA evidence becomes both a gold standard and a battleground. Public trust in the justice system, already fragile, is tested further, and beneath the legal outcomes, two names remain: Nicole Brown, Simpson, and Ron Goldman. The case has delivered verdicts, but not unity. It has exposed how justice can diverge depending on forum, standard, and belief. The O.J. Simpson case does not end with a verdict. It settles into the American bloodstream, resurfacing whenever questions of justice, race, celebrity, or violence arise. It becomes a reference, warning, precedent. From a factual standpoint, the record is split. The criminal court finds insufficient proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Civil court finds responsibility by a preponderance of the evidence. Both outcomes are legal. Together, they form a contradiction that the system allows, but the public struggles to hold. Many see this case as a failure, not just due to a lack of evidence, but because of broken trust. They lost trust in the police, who made mistakes at the crime scenes, in the prosecutors, who didn't fully grasp the story, and in a system that treated the well-documented history of domestic violence as background information instead of a key element. Nicole Brown Simpson's emergency calls, photos, and diary entries are now frequently analyzed to understand how warning signs are often ignored until tragedy strikes. The investigation leaves behind lessons written in its absence. It reshapes how domestic violence is understood in courtrooms, pushing it from a private matter to a predictive pattern. It forces law enforcement to confront the consequences of bias, not just morally, but strategically. One compromised witness was enough to tilt an entire case. Culturally, the trial changed media forever. It proves that a courtroom can become entertainment, and that spectacle can distort comprehension. Complex evidence reduced to sound bites, human loss eclipsed by performance. Future courts restrict cameras. The system adapts, but slowly. O.J. Simpson was later released from prison in 2017 after serving time for an unrelated crime. He lives quietly afterward. Nicole and Ron do not age. They remain fixed in memory at the moment they were taken. The social lesson is stark. Justice is not only about facts, it is about credibility, about who tells the story, and whether they are believed. When institutions fail to protect victims early, they are often asked to explain their suffering later. The case endures because it never fully resolves. It asks viewers to sit with discomfort, to accept that legality and truth do not always align, and to remember that behind every spectacle are lives that do not get a second trial. The final question remains, unresolved by time or verdict. When the system speaks, who does it truly serve, and who is left unheard?